Chapter 475. As a man of action through and through, Zhang Cheng quickly ordered 2 apprentices and 2 dragonborn mages to come to the public area of the central tower. They began testing the effects of the arcane magic potion, as well as the subsequent improvements. Ever since that night, the Arcane Brotherhood had completely fallen under his control. They had even changed their name to a nicer one, Arcane Light. In order to numb the spies of Neverwinter, Deepwater City, and the Harpist League, the entire organization had abandoned their previous aggressive stance and adopted a strategy of shrinking. Apart from ensuring the transmission of the most basic information, most of the core members were recalled and selected by the Dragonborn mages. Those who were capable drank the Dragon Blood Potion and became the core members. Those who were incapable and liked to fight among themselves were dealt with. At present, there were only 24 spellcasters in the Spire who could cast arcane spells of level 5 and above, 40 low-grade mages who could cast spells of level 1 to level 5, and the rest were all apprentices. Including the recently recruited ones, the entire organization only had a little over 130 people. However, it was these 130 people who ruled over Luskan's 16,000 residents. None of them dared to act rashly or challenge the authority of the adepts. In addition, the army of thousands of monsters was stationed outside the city in a newly established barracks. Anyone who wasn't a fool would obediently choose to obey instead of rushing to their deaths. At the same time, a series of reforms were being carried out in an orderly manner. For example, the originally chaotic law and order had now been cleansed and reorganized by human guards. Any acts of fighting, brawling, stealing, robbing, or occupying territory would be arrested without exception. They would be handcuffed and forced to do heavy manual labor, demolishing and renovating the disorderly streets and buildings. Although such a severe blow naturally caused many people to complain, not many people actually dared to resist. This was because not long ago, a few self-proclaimed powerful gang leaders had tried to secretly wreak havoc. In the end, they were hung from the city walls in less than 2 days and wailed in agony for an entire day. With the powerful surveillance abilities of the Wizard Tower, all schemes were futile. Even the war creatures hiding in the sewers were no exception. Magic, the most powerful force in the entire Faerun continent. In the face of its unparalleled power, even the gods would retreat and tremble, let alone a group of mere mortals. Under the suppression of an iron fist, regardless of whether it was a criminal organization or a war creature, they were all uprooted. They would become the new Luskan, and their last drop of blood would be shed. As one of the first few people to join Zhang Cheng, Gildan was standing in front of the window, watching the bustling scene of demolition and reconstruction outside. After a full minute, he sighed with a smile. "I've never been so sure that this city will become better than it is now. Sir Consul, I think I need to remind you that we already owe a debt of 300,000 gold coins. If we complete the renovation and expansion of the entire city area according to the plan, 1 or 2 zeros will be added to this number." A woman in her 40s cautiously reminded. "Ha ha, don't worry about the debt. The Spire will provide us with sufficient funds. You still don't know, but that lord doesn't just want to rule Luskan. He wants to build an empire, a powerful and prosperous empire." As he spoke, Gildan subconsciously grasped his sword, the flames of ambition shooting out from his eyes. Although he was now the highest military and political leader of the city in name, and could be said to be second only to one person and above tens of thousands, he was not satisfied with that. On the contrary, after seeing the terrifying sight of the black dragon's breath with his own eyes, he believed that the person he was loyal to could take the next step, unify the North with absolute force, and build a powerful country. At that time, he could also rely on his achievements to become a high and mighty noble, and even own a large territory and a castle of his own. As the saying went, the desires and ambitions of humans never had an end. When they were hungry, they would crave food, and when they were full, they would crave more wealth and power. "You've seen that, Lord." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. Because they lived in seclusion, Most of the residents of Luskan knew that the one ruling them was a powerful black dragon, but very few had actually seen it, especially in human form. Of course, why do you think I became a consul? I've been working for that lord since a long time ago. Remember, Vaya, he's different from any dragon or wizard you met before. As long as you can show your unique abilities, you'll definitely be recognized and promoted. Gildan hinted meaningfully. The woman called Vaya nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Don't worry, I won't let you and that lord down. Also, the emissary from Neverwinter has arrived. We'd better hurry up and arrange for the signing of the trade agreement. No, you'll be in charge of this matter. I have more important things to do. Gildan patted her shoulder and disappeared at the end of the corridor without looking back. Looking at his back, Vaya subconsciously frowned and muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "What is this? A test?" Or, before she could finish her sentence, a translucent figure suddenly passed through the wall and appeared in the room out of thin air. "Sparrow, how is it? Did you find out anything? Damn it, how dare you barge in?" Vaya obviously knew the intruder. Her expression changed slightly, and she quickly turned around and closed the door. "Sorry, the negotiation is imminent. We need to know Luskan's attitude." The intruder in the form of a spirit took a deep breath and emphasized, "All right, this is the first time. I hope there won't be a next time. Otherwise, you'll get me killed." Vaya helplessly rubbed her eyebrows. "Actually, I didn't get much information. Judging from the recent large-scale renovation and cleanup of crimes, the Black Dragon seems to be planning to reshape Luskan into a prosperous trade hub. So they're not a threat for now? No, on the contrary, they're a bigger threat than before. The dragon wants to annex the north and build a powerful, evil empire. However, in the next few years, they'll be dormant and slowly accumulate strength for the next expansion." After hearing this, the intruder secretly sighed in relief. Thank goodness. In that case, there won't be a war for a few years. As for the future, don't worry about it. Neverwinter's current financial situation is very bad. We must restore the sea trade. Understood. I'll keep an eye on them. Thank you. Lord Nazir will not forget your contribution. Chapter 476. The dock area, originally the most chaotic and dangerous area of Luskan, had been gradually restored to order under the patrolling of 100 fully armed soldiers. There were even some small stalls selling fish, prawns, crabs, oysters, and other seafood. However, as the saying goes, where there is light, there must be shadows. Where there is order, there must be chaos. Where there is justice, there must be evil. No matter how strict the laws were, or how powerful the law enforcement agencies were, they would never be able to root out the criminal organizations at the bottom of society. They were like weeds in the wild. Even if they were repeatedly harvested and burned, they would stubbornly grow back again and again. As a girl who had grown up in a dangerous and complicated environment, Whistler knew very well that she would never be a match for the Magi in the Spire. Thus, when Zhang Cheng tightened the noose around the guild, she decisively chose to surrender and provided him with the relevant information. Thus, not only did she not get slaughtered, but she also received a large amount of financial, material, and manpower support after the event, becoming a kind of semi-official thieves guild. The mission was very simple. On one hand, she had to control all the illegal transactions in the city and prevent external forces from infiltrating. On the other hand, she had to gather information and secretly investigate the actions of the law enforcement agencies and administrative personnel to ensure that there were no traitors or spies from the enemy. Of course, as the price for her surrender, she had to hand over important assets and the power to appoint personnel. Even so, it was far better than the illegal trading of maps and information. At least, as the king of the underground world, she did not have to worry about anyone wanting her life. Leader, our spy has just sent a piece of top-secret information. A thief suddenly barged into the room and placed a piece of paper with a red mark on the table. Oh, who sent it? Whistler was surprised. According to the rules established by the guild, under normal circumstances, only spies who had entered the upper echelons of the management system were allowed to use a red mark. It's Evra. Evra? Isn't he in charge of keeping an eye on Gildan? Could it be that this guy's been bribed? Whistler frowned and slowly opened the piece of paper that was only as thick as a finger. Her face quickly revealed an expression of disbelief. Damn it! Vaya is actually a spy from Neverwinter. Quick, send this information to the spire. You must personally hand it to that person. Understood. The thief obviously realized the seriousness of the problem. He nodded vigorously and quickly picked up the piece of paper and ran towards the spire. About 10 minutes later, Zhang Cheng, who was testing the effects of the potion in the public area of the central spire, received the note. He smiled and said to the moon elf beside him, "See, this is what the so-called kind people do. Infiltration, assassination, destruction, and theft of information. They are no different from us. Do you need me to get rid of her?" Valindra asked with a faint smile. No, there's no need. Although she was a spy, she had shown good management skills during this period of time. Let her continue to serve Lucan. Don't forget to give me a 24-hour watch. I want to know who she meets and what she says every day. Remember, if you want to make a city or even a country prosperous and powerful, it's not enough to rely on force alone. You also need talents from all walks of life. For a long time to come, our actions will revolve around internal affairs, such as developing trade, reclaiming farmland and pastures, excavating mineral veins, increasing the number of workshops, and so on. Therefore, he tried not to be aggressive. In a few years, the city of Neverwinter would slowly lose its vigilance. When the time is right, we will start a war and quickly defeat Deepwater City before they can react. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and straightforwardly stated his plan. After all, in half a year, the Farron continent would enter a period of terrible turmoil. It could be said that gods would be everywhere and liches would be inferior to dogs. He did not want to cause trouble at such a time. Only surveillance? Valindra frowned slightly, obviously dissatisfied with this inaction. No, of course, not only surveillance, but also corruption and roping in. You have to understand that everyone has desires, such as money, power, beauty, and power. We can use hobbies to induce the dark side hidden deep in a person's heart. When they do something irreversible, they will naturally lose their original mentality. Zhang Cheng calmly gave some suggestions. Although there was no lack of strong-willed and strong-willed people in this world who could resist all kinds of corruption, there were still many ordinary people. As long as it was done properly, it was easy to turn a few spies. Moreover, there was also the power of magic, such as charm, suggestion, and mind control. I see. I think I know your plan. A strange glint flashed across Valindra's eyes. Just as Zhang Cheng was about to say something, a ring on his finger suddenly emitted a blinding white light. The next second, a teleportation portal opened out of thin air. Following that, he directly stepped through the portal and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes without saying a word. Darkness. Endless darkness. The surroundings were all rocks covered in moss, and the environment was so quiet that one could even hear their own heartbeats. Suddenly, a black figure walked out from the corner and said in an emotionless tone, "You're here?" "Yes, I'm here." "How is it? Have you seen your own shadow?" Zhang Cheng asked with interest. "I have. You're right. The Dark Elf will be a good opponent. But he has a lot of friends, and I need your help." With that, the black figure took another step forward, revealing an extremely ordinary face. He was none other than the famous assassin, Artemis Entreri. Why should I help you?" "Because I can agree to your previous conditions. You agree to work for me?" Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. He never expected that the other party would accept his invitation so quickly. "Yes, but before that, I need to complete the mission given to me by my previous employer. I believe you wouldn't like an assassin who betrays his employer before completing his job, right?" Entreri expressionlessly stated his request. "No problem." Zhang Cheng nodded without hesitation. "Where are they now? Isn't this place underground?" "They've entered the depths of the subterranean world. According to my investigation, not only are there thousands of gray dwarves below, there's also a dragon, a terrifying black dragon called Shua Ing. Sounds interesting. What are you waiting for? Lead the way. You know my time is precious." Following Chapter 477. After passing through the complex tunnels and dodging the endless attacks of the Grey Dwarves, Drizzt and his party finally arrived at the end of their adventure, Mithril Hall. This was the legendary treasure trove of Mithril, and it was also Bruenner's childhood nightmare and home that he had been searching for over 100 years. Standing in front of a huge and empty underground valley, the old dwarf pointed to the front and introduced it to his companions. "This is Glenn's Canyon. You can throw a torch down there. It will be extinguished before it hits the ground." The others followed the direction of his finger and soon saw a spectacular scene that they would never forget. Huge stalagmites stood like mountains in the bottomless darkness, with only a lonely arch bridge connecting the two sides. Countless Grey Dwarves were on the other side of the bridge, smelting ores with the help of geocentric fire, creating mithril armor and weapons that would make the humans on the surface go crazy. In the deepest part of the valley, a chilling roar could be heard from time to time. "Oh my God, there are at least 4,000 fully armed Grey Dwarves here. Are you sure we want to go down now?" Regis' whole body was trembling slightly. He couldn't help but tremble. After all, the Grey Dwarves were not the fragile human army on the surface. First of all, they were completely immune to illusions, paralysis, and poison. They also had decent magic resistance like the Dark Elves, although not as abnormal as the former. Secondly, they had innate magic abilities such as metamorphosis and invisibility once a day. Lastly, and most importantly, living underground for a long time had allowed them to evolve a type of night vision, allowing them to see clearly even without light. The halfling didn't dare to imagine what kind of terrible disaster they would face if their whereabouts were exposed. "Shut up. We have to go down. There's a damned enemy waiting for us to clean up." Bruenner roared in a frenzy. He was so agitated that he didn't even care about his companion's warning. Calm down, my friend. I know you want to take back your home." But before Drizzt could finish his words, a figure suddenly jumped out of the darkness, kicking the barbarian off the cliff and pushing Bruenner towards the archbridge, exposing him to the sight of the two Grey Dwarf guards. "Intruder! Go! Kill him!" The guard did not waste any time and directly swung his axe at Blueno. Although the Grey Dwarves were cousins of the dwarves, their relationship was not good at all. Just seeing each other would cause them to fight to the death. "Damn it! Be careful! Drizzt, he's the assassin I mentioned." Catti-Brie warned loudly when she saw the attacker's face. Enchili ignored the girl who was making a fuss. He drew his weapon and bowed slightly. "It's nice to meet you, Dark Elf. Do you know, I have been observing you in the dark for a long time, including your exquisite martial skills, as well as your disgusting kindness. Today, let's decide the victor. Who are you? What are you trying to do?" Drizzt drew his scimitar as well, cautiously raising his guard. He could feel a combat technique that was very similar to his from his opponent's graceful steps. To be exact, it was a dance of death. I was originally hired by Bashar Puck to help him retrieve a pendant that was stolen by a thief." The assassin purposely paused and turned back to glance at the trembling Regis. The latter hurriedly took a few steps back, as though he was being targeted by a venomous snake. He kept looking behind him, ready to flee at any moment. Fortunately, Enchili's gaze did not linger for too long. He quickly continued, "But now, I've changed my mind, and that is to kill you. By the way, let me remind you that the girl and the thief better not interfere in our duel. Otherwise, my new employer will not hesitate to kill them." "A new employer?" The Dark Elf Ranger quickly scanned the surrounding tunnels. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. "Stop looking. Unless he is willing to show himself, you won't find him. Now, let's begin this fated battle." As the last word left his mouth, Enchili crouched down like a cheetah and rapidly closed in on the Dark Elf's defensive perimeter. The daggers and short swords in his hands flew up and down, piercing through the Dark Elf's defenses at a speed that was indiscernible to the naked eye. Drizzt was not to be outdone. He brandished his two scimitars, producing a series of metallic clangs and occasionally sparks. The two who were evenly matched were so focused that they did not have the energy to care about anything else. They both knew that if they were distracted for even a moment, their opponent would swiftly end the battle. One exciting duel, isn't it? Just as Catti drew her bow and was about to launch a sneak attack, a hooded man suddenly appeared and placed a hand on her shoulder. Without a doubt, this action startled the girl. She hurriedly took a few steps back and questioned loudly, "Who are you?" "I am the witness of this duel. Anyone who tries to interfere will automatically become my enemy. Beautiful lady, please put down the weapon in your hand. This will be beneficial to both you and me." Zhang Cheng, who had changed his appearance and voice, took off his hood and suggested sincerely, "Regis, come and help me." Catti obviously had no intention of letting herself be captured. She called for the halfling's help, but she had obviously underestimated Enchili's deterrence. Regis did not even have the slightest will to fight. He immediately turned and ran towards the tunnel leading to the surface. "Ha ha ha! Looks like your friend isn't going to help you." Zhang Cheng laughed and threw out a bundle of rope. The halfling had not even run 10 meters when he was bound from head to toe by the rope that fell from the sky. He fell to the ground with a thump. Animate rope. This was a spell that could not be considered high level. Although it could not truly threaten a powerful enemy, it was more than enough to capture a thief who was not very strong. "Wizard? You're a wizard." Looking at the struggling Regis lying on the ground, Catti's eyes flashed with a trace of fear. Having grown up in Icewind Valley, she had never seen any magic. Moreover, her adoptive father was a dwarf who rejected magic, causing her to have an innate fear of magic. "Sit down and watch this duel with me in silence. I promise that once the victor is decided, no matter who kills who, you will be able to leave safely." Having said that, Zhang Cheng snatched the heart-piercing bow from the girl's hand and continued to enjoy the two's precise and deadly performance. Chapter 478. It had to be said that Zhang Cheng had always looked down on warriors, especially those idiots who didn't like to use their brains and only wanted to solve everything with their fists and muscles. However, Drizzt and Entreri were clearly not in this category. 5 minutes had passed since the start of the duel. The two of them maintained a state of high tension and showed no signs of relaxing. Even if their bodies were drenched in sweat, their movements of swinging their weapons didn't change in the slightest. Moreover, every attack was accurate to within a few centimeters of their vitals. If it were an ordinary person, the outcome of the duel would have been decided in a few seconds. However, they gritted their teeth and persevered, their gazes as sharp as swords. Without a doubt, they had both realized each other's strength through the duel, as well as an indescribable sense of similarity. It was as if they were looking at another version of themselves through a mirror. What would a person do if they realized there was someone who was extremely similar to them? They definitely wouldn't hold each other's hands and sit down for a long chat, developing into good friends who could talk about anything. On the contrary, they would do everything they could to separate themselves from the other party, or even kill the other party to become a unique existence. This was especially true for the cold-hearted Entreri. He yearned to slit the dark elf's neck and use his blood and death to prove his worth. "I'll kill you," he panted heavily as he roared at his opponent who was right in front of him. "No, you can't kill me," Drizzt retorted, unwilling to be outdone. Even though he felt his stamina reaching its limit, and even his white hair was drenched in sweat, he was willing to continue for the sake of his friend's safety. He was even willing to end this duel where only one of them could survive. Just as Entreri was about to say something, Zhang Cheng suddenly spoke. "Dear Dark Elf, I think I have to remind you that your duel has lasted for more than 5 minutes. If it doesn't end soon, your barbarian and dwarf friends are dead meat." Drizzt's pupil shrank when he heard those words. He hurriedly turned his head to glance at the arched bridge. He only saw the corpse of a gray dwarf guard. Bruno and the other gray dwarf were nowhere to be seen. "Hey, where are you looking?" Entreri took advantage of the moment when his opponent was distracted and stabbed his dagger into his left shoulder. "Ugh!" Drizzt let out a muffled groan. Even though he reacted quickly and retreated, preventing his entire shoulder from being pierced, he still suffered quite a bit of damage. In the blink of an eye, his blood dyed the mithril chainmail red. But in a battle against normal people or monsters, This kind of injury was nothing. Even if he only used one hand, he could take care of most enemies. But when facing an assassin who had the same strength, skill, and speed as him, this wound was enough to be fatal. The intense pain would cause him to lose the reaction speed that he was so proud of. Once he couldn't keep up with the rhythm, there would be a second, third, and fourth wound, until he couldn't defend anymore and the enemy pierced through his vitals. At the same time, Enchili also realized this. He licked his lips and sneered. "It's finally over. I have to admit, you're the most skilled fighter I have ever seen in my life. But unfortunately, the two of us are like a pair of opposite twins, and one of us is destined to survive." "That's unfair." He interfered with the duel with his words. Caddy Bree immediately protested loudly when she saw her friend injured. "Fair? Ha ha! Silly girl. There's no such thing as fairness in this world. Only the weak beg for fairness. The strong will use all means to obtain victory. Besides, he can't blame anyone for being distracted in battle." The assassin let out a mocking laugh. "Don't be so smug. You haven't won yet." Drizzt endured the pain and assumed a fighting stance. He wasn't the kind of person who liked to complain about fairness. In fact, he had learned from his father that he should never believe a single word from the mouth of an enemy. "I like your unyielding will and gaze. It will give me more satisfaction after killing you. Farewell, Dark Elf. I will miss you." As the last word left his mouth, Enchili shot out like an arrow, bursting into his opponent's defensive circle with unprecedented speed. With his left shoulder injured, Drizzt couldn't resist at all. He could only retreat step by step, trying to parry and block with his uninjured hand. Just as he was about to retreat to the edge of the cliff, he suddenly raised his injured arm and crossed it. He immediately threw away the weapon in his hand and smashed his fist into the assassin's chin. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, perhaps the Dark Elves weren't known for their strength, but the chin was one of the most fragile parts of a human. Once hit, the brain would shake violently and lose its sense of balance. Enchili didn't even have the chance to retaliate before he crashed headfirst into the hard rock. He had no choice but to loosen his grip on his weapon and raise his forearm to block the fist that rained down on him. Even so, he was only able to resist for half a minute before he was knocked unconscious. He probably never dreamed that the Dark Elf would abandon his weapon at the crucial moment and choose to end the duel with his fists. However, Drizzt didn't intend to kill Enchili. After confirming that he had lost consciousness, he immediately stood up and picked up his scimitar, saying to Zhang Cheng with a wary expression, "Mage, how about we make a deal? You let my friend go, and I'll let him go." "He, of course. I have no intention of making you my enemy. I only want to satisfy his obsession with you." Zhang Cheng smiled as he untied the halfling, at the same time generously returning the heart-piercing bow to the girl. "Thank you." Seeing that his captive friend was safe and sound, Drizzt warily expressed his thanks. He also retracted the sharp blade pressed against the assassin's neck and carefully retreated. After crossing the arch bridge, he quickly turned and ran down the tunnel below. After watching the three disappear completely, Zhang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. He bent down and patted Enchili's face. "Wake up, bastard. My head hurts. Where's the Dark Elf?" The assassin slowly opened his eyes and struggled to get up from the ground. "He's gone." "Gone? Did I lose?" "I think so, but I can't accept this." Enchili clenched his fists tightly, hatred shooting out from his eyes. "Don't worry, the game has just begun. If nothing unexpected happens, you still have many chances. Do you know that Drizzt is a Dark Elf? He has a huge advantage in terms of race. You can't defeat him now, so I prepared a little gift for you." Chapter 479. What does it do? Enchili took the potion, his eyes full of doubt. "Strength. Drink it, and you'll gain a special kind of strength." Zhang Cheng answered with a smile. This bottle of energy potion was a strengthening element that it had extracted from the ring-shaped mountain water crystal after countless failures. It was similar to the potion that Gildan had drunk before, but this time it didn't activate the blood and muscle power, but a lighter and more precise nervous system. By increasing the transmission speed of the nervous system, the user could temporarily gain powerful reflexes. The user could even stab a sharp blade into a vital part of the opponent's body and end the battle before they noticed. For killers, assassins, and thieves, this was a qualitative leap from quantity to quality. Enchili stared at the potion that was emitting a faint yellow light. After hesitating for a few seconds, he took a deep breath and drank it all. Half a minute later, he felt as if there was an electric current running through his body, causing his muscles to twitch from time to time. When the feeling disappeared, he tried to move his arms and was surprised to find that the speed was twice as fast as usual. To make sure it wasn't an illusion, the assassin held a gold coin between his fingers and quickly tested the dexterity of his fingers. As expected, the reaction speed of his fingers had indeed doubled. His balance and body coordination had also become stronger. Seeing the look of disbelief on the assassin's face, Zhang Qing asked with a smile, "What do you think? Do you like my little gift?" "Of course. There's no better gift in the world than this." "Thank you." Enchili nodded without hesitation. After all, he came from Port Karen, the most populated and prosperous ancient city on Farron Continent. He knew the price of magic potions very well, especially potions that could improve a person's physique. It wouldn't be surprising if a war broke out in the underworld. "Don't mention it. I've said it before. You won't regret your choice. This is just the beginning. As long as you work hard for me, I promise you'll get more than what you get now. All right, let's stop chatting here. Let's go down and talk to that black dragon called Shuoying. I hope it hasn't been slaughtered yet." With that, Zhang Qing jumped down from the edge of the cliff. The corners of Entreri's mouth twitched slightly at the sight of this. Just as he was about to follow suit and jump down, a deafening roar suddenly erupted from the bottom of the valley. Then a rude voice roared in the dwarven language, "Damn reptile, get out of my house." An old dwarf with a burning cloak on his back was lying on the back of a dragon, holding a mithril battle axe that was embedded in the gap between the dragon's bones. The dragon kept struggling and rolling, trying to throw off the dwarf on its back. Unfortunately, the dwarf was not alone. He had the help of his companions. When the dark dragon turned around and rolled away, a war hammer emitting powerful magical energy rose into the air and smashed into its head, causing it to crash into a nearby stalagmite with a loud bang. Before the black dragon could regain its senses, another mithril arrow with a cold gleam shot out from the darkness, piercing its weak eye and causing it to fall from the sky in pain. Through the red light emitted from the core of the earth, Entreri saw the dark elves hiding in the dark, preparing to deal a fatal blow, as well as the halfling and the magic pendant he needed to take away. "Haha, Drizduchelden, let's change the location of the next duel to Karenport. This time, you won't be as lucky as today." As soon as he finished speaking, the assassin jumped off the cliff as well. With his extraordinary reaction speed, he easily found a foothold on the cliff. Using his hands and feet, he slowed down his falling speed. In the blink of an eye, he arrived behind Regis and directly knocked out the halfling who was watching the battle. Then, in front of the dark elf ranger, he turned around and disappeared at the end of the passage. Although Entreri wanted to get back at Regis, he understood that he had just gained super reaction speed and could not control it perfectly. He needed some time to get used to it and practice. The journey back to Karenport was enough for him to complete all the relevant training and improve his strength to the next level. "Die. Go to hell. You damned murderer." The dwarf Bruno did not notice that one of his friends had been kidnapped by the enemy. He was still brandishing his axe, trying to get rid of the huge monster under his feet. Roar! The intense pain forced Shua Ing to lower its altitude and let out a terrible cry. Just as it was about to crash into the ground, a huge shadow suddenly appeared out of thin air and grabbed the mad dwarf and threw him into a tunnel not far away. Bang! Before Bruno could react, his head made an intimate contact with the wall, and his eyes rolled back and he fell into a deep coma. Who are you?" Shua Ing glanced at the dwarf not far away and asked loudly in Draconic. Because it was blind in one eye, it could not see what the huge shadow above its head was. It could only judge from the smell that it was its own kind. "My name is Ingro Castimazillion, the Great Chaos Dragon. You only have two choices now. submit or be destroyed. Make your choice. Zhang Cheng directly stated his purpose for coming, not wanting to waste any more time with words. Ingro Casti Mazillion? Icing death? You, aren't you a white dragon? Shua Ing looked up and stared in horror at the same kind that was 3 times bigger than itself. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, dragons' names were long and smelly, and they looked similar. But in their circle, they basically knew each other's situation very well. Especially in the north, there were only a few famous dragons, so it was easy to recognize them. Yes, I've undergone a little change recently. I've also gained great power. Surrender, or I'll kill you. Zhang Cheng opened his bloody mouth, and a hot dragon's breath began to brew in the depths of his throat. If the other party dared to say half a word of no, he would directly burn it to charcoal. You can breathe fire? Feeling the restlessness of the fire elements in the air, Shua Ing once again showed an incredulous expression. In any case, white dragon spit ice, red dragon spit fire, black dragon spit acid, green dragon spit poisonous fog, and blue dragon spit lightning. It was already widely known that a different kind of dragon had suddenly appeared, which was bound to be unacceptable to many people. Zhang Cheng ignored the other party, his eyes bursting with crazy flames, and warned in a low voice, "Last chance. Surrender or be destroyed." Chapter 480. It had to be said that Shua Ing was a very sensible black dragon. After comparing the difference in size between itself and its opponent, it chose to surrender without a word. Not only did it surrender, but the thousands of gray dwarves under its command also threw themselves into the arms of their new master. After all, this was no ordinary Duergar tribe. They were a massive tribe that had occupied Mithril Hall for over 100 years. The amount of mithril they possessed was unimaginable. Not only was there a mountain of mithril in their warehouse, every adult Duergar had at least 1 set of mithril armor, at least 3 mithril weapons, a mithril shield, and countless mithril arrows and crossbows. If they were sold on the surface, the entire northern region would fall into a state of scarcity of precious metals. After all, the biggest characteristic of mithril on Farron Continent was that it weighed only half as much as steel in the same volume. However, it was harder and more resilient than the best steel, making it the ideal material to make weapons and armor. Think about it. If one was made of mithril while the other was made of steel, and the former was half as light as the latter, what did that mean? It meant that if the difference in strength between the two was not too great, the former's movements and reaction speed would be faster, and the latter's stamina would be slower. Therefore, no warrior could resist the temptation of mithril weapons and armor, and they were willing to spend a fortune for it. It could be said that apart from adamantine, which was as hard as diamond, there were very few magical metals that could be compared to mithril. Looking at the mithril ingots piled up in the center of the square below the valley, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but smile and nod in satisfaction. Not bad. Looks like you've been mining this vein all these years. Great master. Ever since we killed those darn surface dwarves and occupied this place, we've been mining and smelting mithril every day. Even the dark elves of the Underdark can't compare to our reserves. An old gray dwarf with a white beard and hair bowed and replied carefully. As an old fellow who had personally participated in the war, he would never forget the terrifying lethality of Shua Ying's dive. The Warhammer family had only resisted for less than 10 minutes before they had to flee. Since then, he had made up his mind to never make an enemy of the dragons. Otherwise, his people would definitely be annihilated. Very good. Tell me, how much longer can this mine be mined? Zhang Cheng undoubtedly sensed the other party's respectful gaze and continued to ask. According to the current speed, it will take at least 100 years. The old dwarf hesitated for a moment before giving his own speculation. 100 years? What if I join in and use my scorching dragon's breath to carry out destructive mining? Even if you spit out flames without rest and sleep, it will take at least 5 years. The later the mineral vein is, the more impurities and associated mineral veins there will be, and the lower the efficiency. Also, if I may ask, are you going to give up on this place? The old dwarf obviously sensed something and raised his head with a nervous expression. Yes, I can tell you clearly that this place has been targeted by some powerful forces. It won't be long before they send an army to launch a punitive expedition. If you don't want to suffer heavy losses, you'd better move quickly. Zhang Cheng gave a straightforward answer. Perhaps in the eyes of many, reclaiming Mithril Hall was Bruno's private matter, and only his people and Adabar's shield dwarves were involved. But in reality, whether it was Deepwater City's Kelvin or Silvery Moon City's Illustrial, both of them had secretly contributed a lot. This also meant that the chosen of the goddess of magic had their eyes on this place. Not to mention a few thousand gray dwarves. Even a few dragons would be useless. This was especially so for Illustrial. Recently, she had been actively running around the various cities in the north, trying to use her influence to pull the conflicting rulers to the table and form a loose alliance. Zhang Cheng felt that these actions were very likely targeted at him and Luskin, who was under his control. Punitive expedition. Are they so powerful that even you fear them? The old dwarf obviously found it difficult to accept such an outcome, his expression especially twisted. Yes, perhaps it won't be difficult to repel them once or twice, but do you know what will happen next? Zhang Cheng lowered his head, staring with two eyes filled with madness. Next, there will be gods joining in. The goddess of magic, one of the most powerful gods in the world. Her chosen will become our enemies. Tell me, have you seen the power of legendary magic? Do you want to see your people slaughtered by terrifying magic? No, I don't. You're right. We have to leave this place as soon as possible. The old dwarf subconsciously shuddered, shaking his head with all his might. Not many mortals dared to disregard the dignity of the gods, even the weakest of them. This was because the priesthoods and extraordinary divine powers they possessed were powers that could not be explained with words. This was especially so for the extraordinary divine power known as life and death seizing. It could penetrate most defenses in an instant and directly kill a mortal, no matter how powerful they were. The famous founder of the dragon cultists, Sam Astor, had once clashed head-on with the Dawn King. In the end, after a short confrontation, his physical body was instantly killed by the god, and his powerful spells only scratched the god's incarnation a little. The difference between mortals and gods was so great that not many intelligent beings dared to resist the absolute rule of the gods. Relax. You still have a few months to make use of. At this point, Zhang Cheng suddenly paused and raised his head to look at the tunnel above. He quickly found a figure looking at him. Oh, we have a guest. A guest. Shuttling Shadow, who was lying on the ground, recuperating, suddenly raised its head and flapped its wings in an attempt to fly and kill the intruder. However, before its limbs could leave the ground, Zhang Cheng pressed it down with a claw. Quiet. Illustrial Silverhand isn't someone you can deal with. Wait here, I'll go talk to her. As soon as he finished speaking, he spread his large wings and soared into the air, using the rising airflow from the core of the earth to slowly fly to the side of the cliff. He smiled and greeted, "Welcome, esteemed lady." "Good day," the powerful chaos dragon of Ingro Castmirium. Illustrial bowed slightly. Even though she was surrounded by enemies, she still maintained her elegant posture without the slightest hint of panic. "Can you tell me why you're here? Please don't tell me you're here just to chat with me." "Of course not. In fact, I'm here to negotiate. Mithril Hall is the hometown of the Warhammer family. I hope you can return it to Bruno." As she spoke, Illustrial turned back to glance at the dwarf lying on the ground, his status unknown. Chapter 481. Why? Just because you said so? Zhang Cheng laughed coldly. Although he had already made up his mind to retreat, this did not prevent him from using this opportunity to extort more benefits. After all, the goddess of magic controlled the weave. No matter which mage invented a new spell or improved an existing one, as long as it was cast through the weave, the goddess would immediately know and record it. As the chosen of the goddess, whether it was Elminster, Kelvin, Lila, Simbu, or Illustrial, they all had a huge advantage that ordinary mages could never hope to attain. That was their vast reserves of knowledge and spells. And this was precisely what Zhang Cheng lacked and desired the most. Although the Arcane Brotherhood's library was much richer than most independent mages, it was still a small organization that could not be brought to the table. It could not compare to spellcasters with complete systems and legacies like Silvery Moon City, Deepwater City, the Thel Empire, or Harua. In fact, the Arcane Brotherhood had always been in contact with the red-robed wizards of Thel, exchanging low-level spells that did not involve core secrets. They even provided a terrifying drug that was smuggled into Silvery Moon City and sold to addicts. However, this kind of scheming cooperation had completely stopped after Zhang Cheng came to power. Thus, he did not obtain any new knowledge or spells for the time being. He urgently needed a stable channel, especially regarding the research and development of legendary spells. You're not going to refuse? Illustrial's sharp senses detected something, a trace of surprise appearing on her beautiful face. Why would I refuse? Everything in this world has value. If you can give me satisfactory conditions, I don't mind giving up this place. Similarly, if the conditions do not satisfy me, then I'm sorry, but I will do my best to protect my property. If you dare to attack, I will make this place sink into the ground forever. As the last word left his mouth, Zhang Cheng's body emitted a powerful energy, following which, whether it was the ground or the cliffs, everything began to shake as if there was an earthquake. This was one of the abilities that he had recently discovered, and it was also the power of the earth that the Titans of Azeroth had bestowed upon the Black Dragon. Although he could not directly trigger a terrifying cataclysm on a planet like Wings of Death, creating a slight earthquake in an area was definitely not a problem. Feeling the slight tremors from the ground, Illustrial's eyes were filled with intense shock and vigilance. It was only after a full minute that she shouted, "Enough! Stop! Tell me, what do you want?" "Knowledge. I want all the knowledge from the Seventh Circle to the legendary level in your head. In exchange, I promise that I will never have any ideas about Mithril Hall in the future." Zhang Cheng waved its claws impatiently. He didn't know why, but every time he saw the other party, he felt an inexplicable sense of disgust. He wanted to completely destroy the other party, both physically and mentally. Knowledge. Illustrial didn't expect this terrifying black dragon to make such a request, and she frowned subconsciously. Normally, the five-colored evil dragon would prefer treasures. She had originally planned to pay a batch of gold, silver, and jewels in exchange for the Mithril Hall. But now, it seemed like there was no need for it. "Yes, I'll leave with them whenever you bring the things I want to you. You don't have to give me an answer immediately. You can go back and think about it." Zhang Cheng gave her a meaningful look and slowly returned to the bottom of the canyon. He believed that with Illustrial's personality, while she might not be able to fulfill all of his requests, she would at least be able to fulfill half of them. The last thing this Lady of Hope wanted was to see a war break out. This would cause many conflicts hidden under the surface and cause her plan to unite the cities around Silvery Moon to fail. For a woman who pursued politics her entire life, she was willing to pay a small price in exchange for temporary peace. Zhang Cheng had grasped the weakness in his opponent's personality, or rather, her flaw. Furthermore, he did not care whether Luskan would be destroyed or not. If necessary, he had the power to overturn the situation in the north. After all, Luskan was just a tool to achieve his goals. He would abandon it if he had to, and would not risk his life for the city. However, Illustrial could not. She viewed Silvery Moon as something more important than her own life, and was willing to sacrifice everything for the city, including her own life. The huge difference between the two caused this negotiation to be unequal from the start. The only thing Illustrial could do was to reduce the price she had to pay as much as possible, and ensure that the dangerous and taboo knowledge in her mind would not be obtained and used by the other party. At the same time, Artemis Entreri, who was hundreds of kilometers away, was on the deck of a merchant ship. He squinted his eyes and felt the sea breeze blowing against him. Not far behind him, Regis was carefully crouching in a corner, his eyes filled with fear for the future. The halfling knew that once he returned to Port Karen, the leader of the guild, Puck, would be very happy to let him have a taste of this world's most painful punishment. "You little thief, did you know?" I didn't intend to capture you. I only wanted your gem pendant, but that dark elf changed my mind. Entreri said without turning his head. Don't be smug. My friends will find me. If Driz can defeat you once, he can do it again. Regis retorted with gritted teeth. The assassin laughed and shook his head. Ha ha ha. You don't understand who I'm working with, do you? This time, I'll kill the dark elf in Port Karen and use his blood and life to prove that my path is the right one. Enjoy your last moments. Once the ship reaches the shore, your little life will enter the countdown. If I were you, I'd prepare a poison and hide it. When Puck starts torturing you, you can consume it directly. That'll save you a lot of pain. I won't die. I won't commit suicide. My friends will come and save me. Watching the other party leave the deck, the halfling bit his lower lip hard and muttered to himself in a voice only he could hear. It wasn't hard to tell from his trembling legs that he was just comforting himself, finding an excuse not to commit suicide. After all, ever since they were kidnapped and escaped from Mithril Hall, the two of them had been directly teleported to Luskan with the help of a dragonborn wizard. They boarded this merchant ship heading south. They had left behind at least half a month's journey. It was impossible for Drizzt and his party to catch up to them. Even if they did, Regis would have already become a mutilated corpse. Of course, what the halfling didn't know was that Entreri didn't intend to leave too quickly. He would leave some obvious traces at the various ports along the way so that the Dark Elves could catch up. Chapter 482. Extracting energy from primitive magic, completely breaking free from the Weave's control, and reshaping extremely complex spell models according to my will. Legendary magic is what I've been searching for, Zhang Qing muttered to himself as he flipped through the yellowed parchment scroll in his hands. It had been almost 2 months since he'd made his request, and he'd already gotten some of what he wanted from Illustrial. Of course, the Grey Dwarves had also started to leave Mithril Hall as a price, settling down in an underground mine less than 40 kilometers away from Luskan. The Arcane Brotherhood had originally used slaves to mine the refined iron ore there, and it was just right for them to manage and mine it. After all, the Grey Dwarves were naturally excellent blacksmiths and craftsmen, and they were also good at night battles and sneak attacks. With over 4,000 Grey Dwarves stationed nearby, anyone who wanted to send ground troops to attack Luskan would have to be careful. There was no need to worry about encountering danger along the way. With the help of the Dracolic that controlled the power of broken magic crystals, they could just build a portal between the two places. In fact, Zhang Qing planned to let the Grey Dwarves slowly build a huge underground city to store things that couldn't see the light of day, or to conduct dangerous large-scale magic experiments. After all, the parchment didn't specify how long he'd be staying in this world. However, judging from the dragon's body, it definitely wouldn't be short. Furthermore, in half a year or so, Farron would usher in a period of turmoil. The gods would lose their prided identities and be imprisoned in the bodies of mortals. Many gods would die during this time, including the second-generation goddess of magic. Mages, warlocks, and bards would have to directly face the primitive energy that was no longer restrained by the weave. Some of them would go crazy, while others would die under the frenzied magic. A very small number of them would feel the greatness of the most primitive magic and grasp the power that spellcasters should have. Similarly, priests and a small number of druids who relied on nature gods to obtain divine spells also faced an insurmountable obstacle. They had to follow their god in order to obtain divine spells. Although all of this had happened in less than a year, the impact on this world was far-reaching. Most importantly, it was a rare opportunity to have close contact with a god. Zhang Cheng, who was constantly hovering between madness and reason, longed to kill a relatively weak god and decipher the mystery of divine power. He even secretly made a list of the weakest gods in the Faerun continent with the fewest followers. God slaying. No one who pursued power could resist such a temptation. But before that, he needed a weapon that could harm the gods, and this weapon was legendary magic. It was a type of violent power that surpassed level 9 spells and was completely out of the control of the weave. Just as he was immersed in the joy of absorbing new knowledge, there was a sudden knock on the closed door. Bang! 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 Who? Zhang Cheng put down the scroll in his hand, his tone full of impatience. Master, it's me. Sydney's voice came through the crack in the door. Is there anything important? Hearing that it was a female apprentice, Zhang Cheng's frown loosened a little, because he knew that unless something major had happened, the other party would not easily disturb him. There's a mysterious and powerful mage who wants to talk to you face to face. Me? Where's he? Zhang Cheng narrowed his eyes, a strange expression on his face. After the Battle of Neverwinter, he was no longer a nobody. The name of the Dragon of Chaos had spread to every corner of the western coast, along with the ballads of wandering poets. This was especially true for the dragon's breath that was infused with magical energy. It could instantly destroy the stability of the weave, temporarily turning it into a chaotic magic zone. It was the bane of spellcasters. He could not think of a mage who was tired of living and dared to come looking for him. Even Illustrial was unusually careful when meeting him. He's in the hall on the first floor. It looks like he won't stop until he sees you. A few minutes later, Zhang Cheng finally met the mysterious mage who wanted to see him in the public area on the first floor of the Mage Tower. He wore a black velvet robe, black gloves, and a few rings that shone with a strong magical light on his fingers. A neck guard made of unknown metal covered his entire head, only revealing two cold eyes. Most importantly, he gave off the aura of a tyrant, as if anyone who dared to defy his orders would be cruelly killed. Greetings, powerful dragon. I've heard many stories about you recently, so I've come to pay you a visit. Saying this, the mage placed a hand on his chest and bowed slightly. Who are you? Zhang Cheng sized him up with interest. Me? My name is Manson. I'm sure you've heard of this name before, right? The mage winked mischievously. Manson? The lord of Sandier Castle? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. Even though he had been searching his mind for the name of a powerful mage in the north, he had never thought that it would be Manson. Manson was no small character. Not only was he the lord of Sandier Castle, he was also the highest leader of the Zinarim Guild, which was on par with the Harpist Alliance. He controlled one of the largest intelligence networks in this land. Manson had secretly allied with the god of tyranny Ban's church, attempting to spread the might of the Dark Lord throughout the world. Ha ha, that's right, it's me. To be honest, I'm very curious as to how you turned from a white dragon to what you are now, and even more curious as to what you're doing now. If you don't mind, can you share your story? Manson laughed loudly as he made his intentions clear. Looking at the mage's ambitious and lustful eyes, Zhang Cheng smiled slightly and replied in a meaningful tone, Sorry, I don't intend to share my secrets with anyone. You, on the other hand, came to Luskan alone. Don't tell me you're just here to satisfy your curiosity? Manson shrugged nonchalantly. No, of course not. On the contrary, I believe that we have the same goals and interests. We can work together to fight the Harpist Alliance and those annoying chosen of the Goddess of Magic, especially that troublesome old man Elminster. Oh, work together? Yes. You don't know yet, do you? Some people have already begun to see you as a terrifying threat. They're planning an assassination to solve the problem once and for all. Assassinate me? Don't tell me it's those idiots from the Harpist Alliance. Chapter 483. Haha, an assassination? Sounds interesting. I'm looking forward to the performance of the assassins from the Harpist League. I hope their performance will please me. Zhang Cheng did not hide his disdain. Assassination? If he was in a human body, he might have been more cautious. But now, he could not do anything even if he was facing a divine weapon, let alone a mere magical weapon. The reason was simple. The life force of a dragon was so strong that it would not die even if it was hit by a legendary spell. At most, it would only be severely injured. In addition, he had entered this world as a soul. Even if this body was destroyed, he could still find another one. As the saying went, when a person did not have to worry about his own death, he would naturally become more and more fearless. Mansong had seen the proud side of many dragons. He smiled and shook his head. No, my friend, please do not underestimate the assassins from the Harpist League. Also, the power of the dragon-slaying sword is much stronger than you think. It can easily tear through tough scales and cause wounds that cannot be healed in a short time. I never underestimate anyone, but I also never overestimate anyone. Remember, I am not one of those idiots whose minds are filled with plunder, treasures, food, and sleep. I am a powerful spellcaster who has mastered a ninth circle arcana spell. As he spoke, Zhang Cheng unleashed the terrifying magic power in his body without holding back. As a traveler who had been to many worlds, his talent in magic had long surpassed that of 99% of the mages. Especially after peeking into the memories of the demons from Erida, his mind was filled with knowledge from the advanced magic civilization. He knew how to store and use energy more efficiently, so his spell slots were more than double that of a normal mage in Faron Continent. He was also secretly studying the powerful rune technology of Erida. He planned to imitate the wings of death and use gems and magical metals to create a full body armor for himself. On one hand, it could store more magic power and increase the power of evocation spells. On the other hand, it could increase his resistance to physical attacks. It was killing two birds with one stone. Unbelievable! How did you do it? Sensing the suffocating energy in the air, Mansong finally revealed a horrified expression. One had to know that he had always been known for being calm and cruel. He rarely lost his composure. It's simple. Knowledge is power. I have a few interesting new spells here. You'll understand after you read them. Zhang Cheng casually pulled out a few parchment from his pocket and handed them over. Without hesitation, Mansong opened it and examined it carefully. After a full 10 minutes, he raised his head again and asked with a serious face, "Who are you?" These spells were definitely not creations in the ordinary sense. They originated from a completely different magic system. You merely transformed it into the weave and released it. Ha! That was right. In fact, I'm not a white dragon at all, Ingro Casmirium. It died a long time ago, and its body was taken over by my soul. To put it simply, I came from another world, a world completely different from this one. I know a lot of profound magic knowledge. How about it? Are you interested in joining forces with me to conduct research in this area? Oh, right. It would be even better if we could get Searle and his group of red-robed mages as well. As he spoke, Zhang Cheng's eyes revealed endless madness. Even Mansong couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Lunatic. A complete lunatic. Mansong had no words to describe his feelings at this moment. He had seen many mentally unstable mages, including the crazy mage who kept digging underwater Deep City, Hallis Blackrobe. But none of them was as terrifying as this dragon before him. This madness was not on the spiritual level, but from the soul. A madness that was unrestrained and without limits. It was a madness that would not matter even if the entire world was destroyed. What do you want? Mansong, who had secretly raised his guard, carefully probed. I want knowledge. Forbidden and powerful knowledge. As a reward, I will provide you with some very interesting things, such as this. Just as he finished speaking, a green fire of evil energy burst out of Zhang Cheng's left palm, and a cloud of dark shadow energy appeared out of thin air in his right hand. This is, as a true legendary mage, Mansong instantly realized that whether it was evil energy or shadow energy, they were forms of energy that he had never seen before. The former was extremely violent, full of destruction and depravity. The latter was like a shadow in the dark, wildly devouring everything around it. Yes, this is the magical energy that I brought from another world. Powerful, evil. It can even give the user the power to destroy the world. Now tell me, are you willing to work with me? Zhang Cheng asked with a half-smile. Perhaps the word transmigrator was something that should never be mentioned in many worlds, but it was the opposite in the Faron Continent. This was because there were so many transmigrators here. The famous elves had transmigrated from a world that was on the verge of destruction with the help of powerful magical teleportation technology. The ancient Amaska Empire had also opened an interdimensional teleportation portal and plundered a large number of slaves from an unknown world, which directly led to their destruction. Even the god of justice, Tyre, had transmigrated from another world. It was precisely because there were so many transmigrators that the people of the Farron continent no longer cared if someone was from another world, and they would not make a big fuss over it. On the contrary, they enjoyed the knowledge, and technology that the transmigrators from different worlds brought. So Zhang Cheng had never worried about his identity being exposed. After all, even if his identity was exposed, it would only add to the gossip, and no one would care. Mansong narrowed his eyes and cast a few detection spells. Finally, he nodded with a serious expression. "It's an honor. Mighty one from another world. Please allow me to apologize for my previous offense and rudeness. Perhaps we should go one step further and form an alliance. Please believe me, this is good for both of us." Alliance? No, it's too early to talk about this. Let me deal with the assassins of the Harpist League first. Also, don't forget to inform the Red Robe Wizards of Searle that I have something very interesting in my hands. Enough for them to build an army of automatons. Understood. I'll pass on your message as it is. But please forgive me for being blunt. The Red Robes are used to being arrogant, and I'm afraid they won't make any promises easily. Chapter 484. The Zinarim Guild, the Red-Robed Wizards of Searle, and the Arcane Brotherhood that had been annexed and reorganized. Zhang Cheng had unknowingly started to link up the largest and most famous evil organizations in the western part of the continent to satisfy his strong desire for knowledge and a strong desire for destruction. He did not know if it was because of the tear of Nesario, but he hated the hypocritical kindness of the goddess of magics chosen from the bottom of his heart. He hated the self-proclaimed righteous cities like Silvermoon City, Deepwater City, and Neverwinter even more. He even hated the black and white division of factions and wanted to destroy everything from the bottom of his heart. After all, in his eyes, there was no such thing as justice or evil in the world. All the parameters that measured good and evil were determined by the values of the main group of people who occupied a certain area. These values were usually determined by the overall strength of the group. Simply put, it was power. No matter if it was a person or a group, as long as they had enough power, they would be able to continuously expand outwards, defeat all kinds of enemies, and annex the other party's resources to strengthen themselves. In this process, the victors would write history and pretend to be the righteous side, while the losers would be mercilessly smeared and become the evil side. However, the problem with the Farron continent was that the high and mighty gods had refined a series of good and evil standards. Normally, no matter what choice a person made, they would be inclined towards good, evil, order, or chaos. When these values reached a certain threshold, people would automatically change sides. These factions would be detected by many arcane spells and divine spells. Over time, people would treat the standards of good and evil that the gods had imposed on the mortals as something that could never be changed. They would start to accept and acknowledge it from the bottom of their hearts. However, Zhang Cheng was different. He did not feel that he should follow this set of standards at all. He also did not think that people like Illustrial and Lord Sil ruled the city with justice. On the contrary, like most politicians, they relied on pure violence to maintain their rule. If they did not have enough deterrence, their rule would quickly be overturned and overthrown. After all, the Farron continent had never lacked ambitious and scheming people. As for the hypocritical things like kindness and justice, they were just a disguise, an excuse, and a way to confuse the people and suppress their enemies. Just as Zhang Cheng began to prepare for the crazy act of killing the gods next year, in a lively hotel room on the second floor of Luskin, four weirdly dressed guys were gathered around a table, discussing in low voices how to complete this dangerous mission. "Joey, tell me, what did you find out?" A woman with obvious half-elf features broke the silence. Her face was smeared with green paint. Apart from a leather armor, she only had a short staff with green leaves in her hand. It was obvious that she was a druid known as the Guardian of Nature. Not far away from her, a colorful leopard was lying on its stomach, yawning from time to time with its mouth full of sharp teeth. "Sorry, there's not much useful information. According to the descriptions of the nearby residents and tavern guests, that black dragon rarely leaves the spire, so an ambush is basically impossible. The human called Joey shook his head regretfully. He looked to be about 30 years old and was relatively thin, but his 10 fingers were unusually nimble. A silver coin, made in Deepwater City, kept flying up and down. Under normal circumstances, those who could be so nimble with their hands were either experienced thieves, who often touched other people's pockets, or wizards who needed nimble fingers to make complicated spellcasting movements. But judging from Joey's appearance, he was obviously the former. Damn it, what should we do? Don't tell me we're going to rush in from the front door. It's no different from suicide. The shield dwarf who was squatting in the corner gritted his teeth and complained as he drank. Agreed. Although we killed many high-ranking members of the Arcane Brotherhood in the Battle of Neverwinter, the number of spellcasters in the Wizard Tower is still considerable. We can't enter the top floor with just a few of us. The half-elf druid who spoke first nodded thoughtfully. Then what do you say? Could it be that we have to wait here forever? Or do we have to retreat? No, we can't retreat. I finally borrowed this dragon-slaying sword. How can we give up halfway? Evil must be eradicated. That's why I joined the Harpist. After saying that, the young human girl in silver half-body armor tightly held the long sword that emitted a faint magical aura. Her eyes shone with a determined light. Judging from the holy emblem on her chest, she was undoubtedly a paladin who served the god of justice, Tyre. But we can't stay in the hotel for too long. It will arouse suspicion. If only the Harpist base was still there. At least we would have a place to stay. Don't think about it. The secret base and spies were all cleaned up some time ago. There's no one who can help us now. I don't like the feeling now. It's like we're surrounded by enemies and have no friends. Seeing that his companion began to sigh, Joey smiled helplessly and suggested in a low voice, "Actually, it's not completely impossible. I have an idea, but it's a little dangerous. If we're exposed halfway, all of us will be killed or captured." "Oh, what idea?" The young paladin's face was filled with surprise. "It's very simple. Set up a trap to lure it in. Do you still remember the mysterious ancient statue we dug out from the ruins half a year ago? Let's use this thing as bait and let the dragon leave the tower to meet us." Joey calmly explained his plan. "Awesome. That statue seems to contain an extremely powerful energy. It should be able to attract the attention of that evil black dragon." The half-elven druid's eyes glowed as she agreed. As the only spellcaster in this adventure team, she had tried many times to decipher the mystery of the statue, but in the end, she had not been able to find anything. Even the great druids in the church did not know the specific use of this thing. Since that's the case, let's make a plan. First, we need to let the whole of Luskan know that this statue is a powerful magical item. Joey, I'll leave this task to you. Is there a problem? The paladin turned and stared at his companion. The latter raised the corner of his mouth slightly and bowed in an exaggerated manner. Of course, I'm the most professional. In 3 days at most, the whole of Luskan will know that you have a statue that contains powerful divine power. We also have to make the corresponding preparations. After all, Luskan is not like Neverwinter, Deepwater, or Silvermoon. Especially the evil wizards in the Spire. They don't mind using some extreme methods. Chapter 485. 2 days later, Zhang Cheng was observing the team sent out by the League of Harpers through a crystal ball in his private room in the central spire of Luskan with a contemptuous smile on his face. He couldn't understand why the higher-ups like Elminster, Kelvin, and the Seven Sisters of the North would be so stupid as to send 4 random people to assassinate him. Did they not know how powerful he was? Or did they have great confidence in the dragon-slaying sword? Or were there disagreements or power struggles within the League of Harpers, and these 4 people were the sacrificial lambs? After all, the Harpist League was a huge intelligence organization, and its members had complicated identities. There were paladins, priests, and warriors who sacrificed themselves for the cause of kindness and justice. And there were also druids and rangers who wanted to maintain the balance of nature. There were even bards who wanted to make a name for themselves, and young adventurers with unrealistic ideals. In short, there were so many factions and factions that even their own people couldn't figure them out. It was not impossible for conflicts of interest to occur. In fact, thanks to Manson's reminder, Zhang Cheng had already received accurate information as soon as these people passed through the gates of Luskan. Their every move was under surveillance. He even knew which girl the thief who spread the rumors had slept with and what difficult moves he used. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for them to escape from Luskan, let alone assassinate them. However, Zhang Cheng did not intend to kill these little rats too early. He wanted to conduct an experiment to see if he could use a series of psychological torments to make them collapse from the physical to the mental, or even fall into the darkness. This was especially true for the young paladin named Verity. If she broke her oath, she would fall and become a dark guardian. Thinking of this, he turned around and asked Sydney, who was standing at the door, "Have you prepared the things I asked you to prepare?" "Of course, master. I guarantee that these mice will feel your meticulous care." Sydney sneered as she gave her answer. "Very good. Have fun, as long as you leave my little saint samurai behind." After saying that, Zhang Qing no longer paid any attention to the other party. He picked up a blank parchment and started a new round of spell model construction. If one were to ask what was the most useful thing he had learned in Faron Continent, standardized spell models would undoubtedly be at the top of the list. Unlike Dalaran, who relied on magic circuits in their bodies to cast spells, the mages of this world relied on precise spell models to cast spells. Every time a mage learned a new spell, the first thing they had to do was familiarize themselves with the spell model and imprint it deeply in their mind. The advantage of this method was that it wasn't easy for accidents to happen. As long as the surrounding weave was stable enough, there would be almost no loss of control. Furthermore, spell models that had been simplified and optimized by countless predecessors used very little energy, and because there was no need to construct magic circuits in their bodies, they could cast all kinds of spells at will. However, the downside was that the mages had to memorize a large number of complicated spell models, so they had to be very smart, and their memory far exceeded that of ordinary people. Otherwise, when a number of models in their mind exceeded a certain number, the memory area of their brain would be filled up. Unless they used self-hypnosis to delete unnecessary spells, they would not be able to learn new spells. That was also why Zhang Cheng secretly studied the life of Grand Arcanist Elam. Reality wasn't a game. It was easy to raise one's intelligence to a very high level by using a modifier or adding points according to the rules. Generally speaking, everyone's intelligence level was fixed from the age of 25, and there was no possibility of increasing it further. Some lunatics who wanted to use magic potions or wishing spells to infinitely increase their intelligence would often have their skulls crushed by the sudden increase in size of their brains, and they would die on the spot. By the same logic, transforming oneself into other forms, such as a lich or a semi-elemental form, would not bring about a leap in intelligence. In this world, there was only one way to infinitely increase one's intelligence, and that was to merge one's consciousness and soul with the Mind Flayer's main brain. In layman's terms, it was to use the Mind Flayer's almost infinite intelligence as the hardware, and use one's own soul and consciousness as the operating system, and finally become a super biological computer with self-consciousness. Then, not only would one obtain two powerful powers of arcane spells and psionic energy, but one would also be able to learn almost infinite spells. At the same time, in a tavern in Luskan's dock area, Joey was hugging a scantily clad woman, drinking while proudly recounting his adventures to the surrounding customers. He did not notice at all that a shadow had silently appeared behind him in the darkness, opening its mouth and ruthlessly biting his neck. "Ah, damn it! Who is it?" The intense pain caused Joey to scream uncontrollably. He hurriedly pulled out his dagger, intending to teach the other party a lesson. Unfortunately, by the time he turned around, the attacker had already left the tavern, disappearing without a trace with the help of the endless stream of people. "Damn it! Don't let me catch you." Helpless, he could only curse in a low voice. He asked the bartender for a glass of water and simply wiped the wound. Because the wound was not deep, it stopped bleeding after a few minutes. On the other side, the guy who had just bitten him quickly crossed the street and walked into a dilapidated wooden house. He licked the remaining bloodstains on his teeth and reported in a low voice, "Sir, I have already bitten the target as you instructed. Also, Tonight happens to be a full moon. Around midnight, he will begin his first irrational transformation. Well done. Inform your subordinates to lie in ambush beside the target tonight. Once he transforms, immediately rush in and attack the other 3 people beside him. You must make sure the target dies at the hands of his companions. After saying that, Sheeny slowly walked out from the darkness, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. As you wish. A man who looked to be about 40 years old with a thick beard bowed. Then, the muscles on his entire body began to expand rapidly, and thick black hair grew on his skin. In the blink of an eye, he had turned from a strong human into a terrifying werewolf. According to the transmission theory of the beastkin disease in the Phaloan continent, any unlucky person who was bitten by a beastkin would be infected unknowingly. When the first full moon came, they would completely lose their rationality and turn into a monster that only knew how to kill and destroy. Obviously, Cindy wanted to force the team into a corner bit by making them kill each other. Chapter 486. At night, Joey, who had been busy all day, finally dragged his tired body back to the inn where he was temporarily staying. He was completely unaware that the terrifying beast virus had already spread throughout his body along his blood vessels. He only occasionally felt that his wounds were itchy. In fact, a few hours after being infected with the beast virus, one could still use some special herbs and spells to prevent the body from mutating. But after a few hours, when the virus had been absorbed by the various organs, there was no longer any possibility of recovery. Simply put, the beast virus was an irreversible one-way genetic mutation. The infected person would change from an intelligent being, such as a human, elf, dwarf, and so on, into a special half-human, half-beast state. They usually maintained a human form, but when they encountered danger, they would transform into a half-beast form, thus gaining greater strength. Whether it was the common werewolves, rat men, or the rare cat men, lion men, and tiger men, they were all a type of beast virus. But unfortunately, Joey clearly did not know this. He pushed open the door and walked into the room, sitting down on the chair and complaining with a face full of bad luck. You definitely can't imagine what happened to me today. A lunatic actually bit me from behind when I wasn't paying attention. Bit you? The half-elven druid frowned subconsciously. Yes. Look, this is the wound. To prove that he was not lying, Joey pulled open his collar and revealed the bite mark that was about to scab. Damn it. How long have you been bitten? The half-elven druid only glanced at it, and his pupils instantly contracted as he questioned loudly with a serious tone. She was so nervous that even the paladins who were praying to the god of justice could not help but look over. About 10 hours. Joey was at a loss as he replied. Even though he did not understand why his teammate would suddenly become nervous, he knew that he seemed to have encountered some kind of trouble. What? 10 hours. You idiot. Why didn't you come back immediately after being bitten? The half-elven druid roared, unable to restrain her anger, her whole body trembling nonstop. Calm down. Little girl, tell me what happened. The dwarf was afraid of a fierce argument and hurriedly stood between the two of them. The druid ignored the dwarf's nervous appearance and explained with gritted teeth. It's the beast virus. He was bitten by a beast virus. Do you see the wound? Do you think a normal wound will heal within 10 hours? Bestiality? The dwarf's face changed dramatically when he heard the word. Oh, damn it. I think it's a full moon today. Before he could finish his words, Joey suddenly stared blankly at the bright moonlight in the night sky outside the window. In the next second, his body began to expand rapidly, and his well-developed muscles tore his clothes apart in the blink of an eye. The thick hair on his body was as dense as grass, and his head, together with his skull, stretched out violently. Finally, it became the head of Canine. Ow! With a loud howl, Joey finally completed his first transformation. His 2 blood-red eyes were filled with primitive and barbaric desire, constantly scanning the other 3 people in the room. Not good. Quick, stop him. Druid clearly understood the danger of werewolves and loudly reminded his teammates. However, the other werewolves lying in ambush broke through the window and launched a frenzied attack. Although Joey had completely succumbed to his bestial nature after his first transformation, he seemed to be able to recognize his own race subconsciously. He did not attack the werewolf, but instead opened his bloody mouth towards his former companions. Retreat. Quickly retreat to the streets. The paladin waved his magical long sword and forced back two werewolves pouncing towards him, and was the first to jump out of the window. As a symbol of kindness and order, what she could not accept the most was to drag innocent people into a battle. Thus, leaving the inn with more people was her only choice. The dwarf and druid followed closely behind. The narrow space was not suitable for them to display their abilities. Just like that, 6 werewolves and a small adventurer team, with only 3 left, stood in formation on the main road of Luskin's eastern city district, ready to fight to the death. However, before the two sides could begin their second round of battle, a dirty little beggar suddenly ran out from the darkness, holding a bowl of hot soup and half a piece of black bread that he'd begged for from who knows where. Seeing this, the young paladin could not help but shout out a warning. "Run, child, run." However, this pitiful little beggar seemed to be frightened by the tall and ferocious werewolf, and stood foolishly where he was. His display of weakness instantly aroused the primitive killing instinct in Ian's mind. He opened his bloody mouth and rushed over, biting the little beggar's neck. "No!" The paladin let out a heart-wrenching roar and rushed forward like an arrow, raising his sword and chopping off the head of his former comrade. "Bastard! What are you doing? You killed Joey." The dwarf pushed the crazy paladin away, his eyes full of anger. He could not believe that his best human friend had died at the hands of his own people. Similarly, the half-elven druid was also dumbfounded, looking at the head that was gradually recovering its original appearance, and a little beggar's corpse that had died with his eyes wide open. Without a doubt, the development of the situation had far exceeded their expectations. Taking advantage of the three's momentary daze, the werewolf who'd achieved his goal quickly turned around and jumped into a nearby sewer. Their mission was complete, and there was no need to risk their lives to fight the enemy. Staring at the dark red blood that streaked across the blade, the paladin who had lost control seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He could not help but shiver all over. His eyes were lifeless as he muttered to himself, "I killed Joey. I couldn't save that child. Great tire. Where's justice? Where's justice?" As the last word escaped her mouth, a ray of holy light left her body. Anyone with a bit of common sense would know that this was because she'd questioned her own faith and thus lost the gift of the gods. On the other side, Sheeny, who was hiding at the end of the sewer, observed everything through the crystal ball. She immediately raised the corner of her mouth and said sarcastically, "Master was right. Hypocritical justice usually doesn't last long. Many times, you just need to create a little conflict, and depravity will come as expected. Next, let me see your potential. After all, you haven't fallen far enough, and there's still the possibility of redemption." Anger, regret, pain, despair. Chapter 487. The dark sewers of Luskin were originally the lairs of rat men, gangs, and pirates. There were even some monsters that crawled in through the estuary. However, after Zhongcheng's Great Purge, most of them had been cleaned up. Only a few black market merchants under the control of the Wizard Tower would occasionally appear to do some shady business. But tonight, 2 groups of unfamiliar visitors were here. One group was a werewolf covered in thick fur, while the other was a group of members of the Harpist League following closely behind the werewolves. Especially the young woman in front of the group, her eyes burning with flames of fury. She had completely lost the most important qualities of a paladin: humility and rationality. Like a madwoman, no matter what she encountered, she didn't say a word and directly chopped her opponents to the ground. Her silver armor was now stained with blood and filthy water, as if foreshadowing an impending tragedy. "Eleanor, we need to talk." The half-elven druid gasped for breath as he leaned on his staff. "No, there's nothing to talk about. I'm responsible for Joey and that innocent child. I have a duty to avenge them." The paladin gripped his long sword tightly, his face frighteningly dark. "That's right. We have to kill those little wolf cubs. Blood for blood. This is true justice. The dwarf gripped his weapon tightly, gnashing his teeth as he spoke of his plan. Seeing that his teammates were blinded by hatred, the half-elven druid could only sigh helplessly and shut his mouth, continuing to walk along the stinking sewers. After about half an hour, they finally arrived at a relatively dry cave. This place was far from the sewers and seemed to have been dug out by someone or an organization. Not only were there many tables, chairs, and beds, there were also rows of weapons and armor of different lengths. The werewolf that had attacked earlier stood near the relatively empty cave entrance, staring with two bestial eyes, ready to pounce and attack at any time. Not far behind the werewolf stood a beautiful woman dressed as a wizard. It was Sydney, who had been waiting for a long time. She first glanced at the paladin and immediately greeted her meaningfully. "Welcome, my dear Eleanor. I've been waiting for you for a while. I hope your performance won't disappoint my master too much. Who are you? Why did you order the werewolves to attack us? Also, who is the master you mentioned?" The half-elf druid stopped his companion, who was about to make a move, and asked cautiously, "Hee, you came here to assassinate my master, and you still have the face to ask me why I attacked you? Is this the shameless face of the Harpist Union?" Sydney sneered sarcastically. "Damn it, was it that black dragon? Does it know we're here?" The dwarf looked around nervously, as if a terrible beast might jump out of the darkness at any time. Shinny curled her lips in disdain. "From the moment you entered Luskin, your every move was under the watch of Master. I really don't know how to describe your actions. Brave? Or was it because the ignorant were fearless? You don't understand how powerful Master is. In front of him, you are as weak as ants. So you set up a trap for Joey and turned him into an evil werewolf?" Eleanor asked loudly, suppressing her anger. "You don't know anything, do you, poor thing? Master only wants you. He wants to see you fall with his own eyes. Now, let's play a little game. Master calls it a test of human nature. Let's see how long you can last." Just as she finished speaking, Sydney suddenly raised her hand and snapped her fingers. "Ha!" With a crisp sound, two large iron cages fell from the sky, trapping the dwarf and half-elf who couldn't dodge in time. Two arrows shot out from the left and right walls at the same time, accurately piercing into their arms. "Ah, despicable." Sydney didn't pay attention to the two who were injured and explained with a smile, "Now, I'll describe the rules of the game. As you can see, these two have been hit by fatal poison arrows. In the next 5 minutes, you have to make a decision. Who will live and who will die? The process is very simple. You just have to kill one of them. But if you refuse to make a choice, then when the time is up, both of them will be poisoned to death." "Shameless. You evil woman. How can you do this? Don't listen to her. I'm a druid. I can't." Just as the half-elf was cursing and trying to cast a nature-divine spell to detoxify the poison, one of the werewolves suddenly went berserk, using his thick arms to strangle her neck through the iron cage. The strong suffocation instantly interrupted the chanting of the incantation. There was no doubt that the detoxification had failed. Seeing this, Sydney nodded in satisfaction and continued to speak to the young paladin. "You still have 4 minutes. Friendly reminder, due to the damage caused by the poison, it's better to make a choice as soon as possible. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that there won't be any side effects after drinking the antidote." Eleanor clenched her fists tightly, her entire body trembling nonstop. From time to time, she would turn back to look at her companion, who was getting weaker and weaker. Although she really wanted to pull out her long sword and immediately kill the evil woman in front of her and find the antidote on her corpse, she still couldn't think straight. However, his remaining sense of reason kept reminding him that since the other party was standing in front of him without fear, he would definitely be on guard. Moreover, mages were notoriously difficult to deal with. Unless it was a surprise attack, killing a mage required breaking through their various defensive spells. If she couldn't take them down in a short period of time, her teammate would be dead. 3 more minutes. Sydney clearly saw the confusion and panic in the paladin's eyes, and once again reported the little time they had left. "Pa, lowly human, Don't think you'll succeed. The dwarf struggled to crawl up from the ground and pulled out an arrow. He aimed at his own eye and stabbed it down, preparing to end his life to stop the scheme from succeeding. But before the poisoned arrow could pierce his eyeball, a figure suddenly appeared in the darkness and directly snatched the arrow from his hand. He laughed lightly and teased, "Don't be in such a hurry to die, dwarf. Do you think your little life is still in your own hands? No, it belongs to me now." Having said that, Zhang Cheng gradually left the cover of the darkness and calmly appeared in everyone's line of sight. "Master, why have you come?" Sydney blinked in surprise. Chapter 488. Without any hesitation, Eleanor responded with a magical long sword in her hand, which was specially designed to deal with dragons. She was too young and agitated. Perhaps it was because she was hot-headed that she did not consider the consequences. Her mind was filled with thoughts of killing the enemy. However, it was a pity that before the dragon-slaying sword could unleash its full power, Zhang Cheng reached out and grabbed it in his palm. The azure magical light seemed to form an invisible energy field that completely blocked the sharp blade. Feeling the strong malice from his sword, he could not help but laugh and tease. "Poor thing, do you really think that the dragon-slaying sword can slay dragons? I can only say that you are too naive. At best, this thing was just a magical weapon. It was no different from those swords that were enhanced with fire, acid, sound waves, lightning, and so on. It could be easily dealt with a high-grade defensive magical weapon. Tell me, who sent you to your deaths?" "To our deaths." Eleanor raised her head, keenly grasping the key word. "That's right. Don't you know? I'm a dragon. A giant dragon that stands at the top of the food chain. Even legendary mages like Illustrial and Kelvin, who were also chosen of the goddess of magic, were afraid of my power. But what about you? You are just a bunch of small fries who do not understand the meaning of power, yet you want to use a magical longsword to assassinate me. If this is not a death wish, then I can only say that it is a miracle that the Harpist Guild has survived until today." After saying that, Zhang Cheng let go of the sword in his hand and took 2 steps back. He did not hide his intentions at all, revealing the most contradictory part of the entire situation. No one was a fool. Even though Eleanor had various personality flaws, it did not mean that she did not know how to think. After pondering for a moment, she realized that there were many loopholes in this operation, especially the higher-ups who gave the order. From the beginning to the end, they did not give any specific information about the enemy, nor did they provide any reinforcements. Noticing the uncertain expression on the paladin's face, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and continued, "See, even you have noticed that there is something wrong with this matter, right? Even though I'm not too sure what happened within the Harpist Guild, one thing is certain. You're all abandoned chess pieces. Perhaps it was to test the waters, or perhaps it was to eliminate the dissidents. I know you must be very angry right now and want to vent the resentment in your heart. But before that, you have to finish the game just now. There's still 30 seconds left. Make your choice. Which one of your companions do you want to let live? Wait, I'm willing to make an exchange with you. I'll tell you who's behind this." Eleanor interrupted loudly. Sorry, wrong answer. You still have 20 seconds. Zhang Cheng bluntly rejected the other party's suggestion. As a person who was good at observing and analyzing mental activities, he had already felt that this young paladin in front of him was only one step away from depravity. How could he allow this young paladin to stop before the precipice? On the contrary, he wanted to push her even harder. 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 8 seconds. Following the final countdown, the 2 poisoned people's faces started to turn green and white foam came out of their mouths. The slightly weaker half-elf's heart even stopped beating. "No, I beg you, let them go. I'm willing to do anything for you." Eleanor was obviously panicking and started to beg like a madwoman. However, Zhang Cheng did not have the slightest reaction to this. He continued to use his emotionless voice to count down. When there were less than 3 seconds left, the young paladin finally broke down. She raised her sword and stabbed viciously into the cage that held the dwarves. Poof! Dark red blood instantly splattered in all directions. The sword pierced through the mithril chainmail and pierced a large hole in the fragile heart. Sydney, detoxify that druid. Seeing that his goal had been achieved, Zhang Cheng chose to fulfill his promise without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, a bottle of specially concocted detoxification potion was forced down her throat. The half-elf, whose heart had already stopped beating, suddenly convulsed and recovered from her state of suspended animation. She started to vomit on the ground. When she saw the scene of the dwarf's heart being pierced not far away, she immediately roared, "Damn it! What have you done? Why are you being fooled by the enemy? Don't you know that they are forcing you to fall into depravity?" "I'm sorry, but I have no other choice." Eleanor seemed to have lost her soul as she slowly pulled her sword out. She closed her eyes and trembled nonstop, as if she was communicating with an invisible existence. After about a few minutes, when she opened her eyes again, a ball of evil red light descended from the sky. "Dark blessing, you've fallen." The half-elf Drew widened his eyes in disbelief. "Fallen? No, I don't think so. I've only seen through Tyre's pale and hypocritical righteousness." Eleanor's eyes were filled with boundless rage as she stabbed viciously at the last surviving teammate. Before the half-elf could react, she already felt an intense pain coming from her chest. She then slowly fell backwards into a pool of blood. After doing all this, Eleanor knelt on one knee and said in a melancholy and sorrowful tone, "Great Master, please allow me to kill all the werewolves here. Otherwise, the anger in my heart will not be quelled." "Of course, please do as you wish. After all, they're no longer of any use." Zhang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. No, no, that's not what you promised before." The leader of the werewolves shouted anxiously, "I'm sorry, I changed my mind. Compared to all of you, she's obviously more valuable." Zhang Cheng replied with a playful expression, "Thank you very much." After receiving permission, Eleanor slowly stood up and raised her weapon, loudly chanting an evil incantation. In less than half a minute, a large teleportation gate appeared out of thin air. A warhorse with red flames all over its body walked out from within. "Oh, a purgatory horse." Sydney revealed a look of surprise. One had to know that if a recently fallen paladin wanted to summon a purgatory servant, they would need to be at least rank 7 in their profession. Furthermore, purgatory creatures were much stronger than those of the material world. Just a purgatory horse was enough to overwhelm the werewolves. Due to the emotional connection, Eleanor directly mounted it. Using the speed of the horse's gallop, she began a frenzied slaughter of the werewolves. Under the suppression of her powerful strength, a few unarmed werewolves were quickly chopped into pieces. The pungent smell of blood spread through the sewers, attracting a few predators who were eyeing them covetously. Chapter 489. After settling the little problem in his territory, Zhang Cheng quickly devoted all his energy to the research of legendary spells. He knew that, as the time of troubles approached, he did not have much time left. Although the form of a saint severely limited the true power of a god, and even a loser like Cyric could kill the famous god of Murderball, his character had determined that he would never give the initiative to his opponent. No matter what, a god was a god, an evolved being that transcended all forms of life in the mortal world, a special being that had an almost endless lifespan and great power. Under the premise that there were no restrictions, they could create one or a few clones that were slightly weaker than their original form according to the strength of their divine power. They could go and do different things, but they would not kill each other because their consciousness was relatively independent. It was important to note that the cloning spell, often used by high-grade mages, would cause all the clones to wake up at the same time. The result would be a bloody battle between the clones until the final victor survived. Even the blood, organs, and corpses of the dead gods could be used to create powerful magic items and undead puppets. Zhang Changkai did not believe that a being that powerful, even in its corpse, would be so weak that it could be easily killed by mortals when it was alive. Just as he was about to complete the first legendary spell model, Mansong finally brought an elegant lich into the spire. "Greetings, powerful black dragon. I am Sazastin, the chief necromancer of the Red-Robed Sorcerers Association. It's a pleasure to meet you." As soon as they met, the Lich, who exuded a strong aura of death, took the initiative to introduce himself. "It's a pleasure to meet you too, esteemed Archmage." Zhang Qing bowed unhurriedly. Outsiders might not know who Sazastin was, but as someone who knew about the development of the Faerun continent in the next few decades, he knew very well that this powerful mage who specialized in necromancy would eliminate all competitors in the future and bring the empire of Serra under his control. What was more frightening was that he had tried to evolve himself from an undead creature into a god through terrifying magic rituals. Although he had failed in the end due to an accident, he was still a talented and important person. In addition, it was said that this guy also had the Death Moon Orb, a divine artifact left behind by the king of sorcerers, Ralik, from the Netheril era. Unbelievable! I've always thought that dragons are arrogant, but you have broken my inherent understanding. Sarzastin's tone revealed a strong sense of surprise. He originally thought that the other party would be very domineering during the conversation, or even use some insulting words. But in reality, it was the opposite. Zhang Cheng behaved like a well-educated noble. "Ha ha, am I right? It's very special." While laughing, Mansong blinked his eyes when the chief necromancer wasn't paying attention. Obviously, he did not tell his old rival that Zhang Cheng came from another world. Sarzastin nodded thoughtfully. "It is indeed very special. I even had the urge to study it in depth. But before that, I have to confirm if you really have what I need. After all, I'm not the only one who has the final say in the Red-Robed Sorcerers Association. Many of the other chief leaders are eyeing me covetously, waiting for me to make a mistake. Of course, a very reasonable request." As he spoke, Zhang Cheng raised both his hands and released the evil fire and shadow energy from his left and right palms. Even though he no longer had the demon Erida in his body, his mind still remembered the birth and composition of these two energies. It was easy to create them through the distorting weave. This is feeling the violent and destructive power of the dark energy at close range, as well as the terrifying, devouring ability of the shadow. Sarzastin showed an excited expression. He even broke off a small section of his finger bone and put it into the two types of energy to observe the subtle changes inside. After a few minutes, he came back to his senses and said solemnly, "Perfect. Tell me, if I want to exchange the knowledge related to creating these two energies, what do I have to give in return?" "Very simple. Help me complete the research of a legendary spell." Zhang Cheng stated his terms without hesitation. Research of a legendary spell? A trace of surprise appeared on Sarzastin's withered face. Zhang Cheng nodded slightly. "Yes, I hope to create a spell that can ignore divine power and directly kill the gods. But unfortunately, it's not easy. I'm missing the most crucial part, and that is the composition of divine power. Killing gods? You're crazy." "No, I'm not crazy. You don't know yet, right? I've just received a shocking piece of news from Prophet. Next year, the God of Gods will eliminate all the gods in the Pantheon due to a certain event. They will all fall to the mortal realm and appear in the material realm as saints. Moreover, they will only retain their mortal bodies. I believe that with the wisdom of the two of you, it shouldn't be difficult to understand what this means, right?" Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and dropped the bombshell. "What? How is this possible?" Manson could not help but exclaim. "Why is it impossible? Haven't you heard of the prophecy of Alan the Wise?" Zhang Cheng continued to lead the conversation with a smile. But from the madness in his eyes, one could tell that he was not calm at the moment. "Prophecy? What prophecy?" Sarzastin frowned subconsciously. Obviously, he felt that the complexity of the situation was a little beyond his expectations. Zhang Cheng did not pay too much attention to the puzzled reactions of the two great wizards. He lowered his voice and recited, "In the days when the saints walk the earth, the king of massacre will create many children. These children will be righteous and evil, but they will all have chaotic blood flowing in their bodies. When the bastard children of these beasts reach adulthood, they will bring a terrifying storm of blood to the Sword Coast. One of them will defeat the other children and inherit their father's power. This successor will change the history of the Sword Coast for hundreds of years. At this point, he deliberately paused and licked his lips before explaining. As the name suggests, the saints are referring to the impending descent of the gods. The king of massacre is Baal of the three death gods. This fable not only clearly points out the impending major event, but also describes the fall of a god. Think about it. If we can take advantage of the fact that the god's power is greatly weakened to kill one or two of them and use their corpses as experiments, wouldn't we be able to decipher the mysteries of the gods, or even replace them? Instantly, Manson's breathing began to quicken. Chapter 490. I'm in. After a long silence, Manson was the first to give an affirmative answer. He had always been an ambitious person. On the surface, he seemed to be working closely with the Church of the God of Tyranny, Ban, and even the second-in-command of the Zinarim Guild, Zobar, was one of Ban's chosen ones. However, deep down, he still did not trust anyone. In fact, this was a common problem for many high-ranked wizards in the Faerun continent. They were dictatorial and tyrannical, and didn't trust anyone other than themselves. Their attitude towards the gods was completely different from that of ordinary people. Not to mention devout believers, almost all of them desired to replace the gods. Even someone like Elminster, who wholeheartedly served the goddess of magic, had his own thoughts and plans, and didn't blindly agree with Mystra. I'm in too. Sarzastin hesitated for a moment, and quickly made his choice. After all, his ambition toward becoming a god wasn't inferior to Manson's at all. Looking at the strong desire in the eyes of these two powerful spellcasters, Zhangsheng slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said in a slightly playful tone, "In that case, let's discuss together how to kill the gods. Of course, to avoid unnecessary losses, I think we should avoid those gods who are powerful and have a large number of believers in the material world. We should choose those who are weaker and lack allies, such as the god of Vengeance Hall, the god of cruel officials Gargos, the goddess of joy Liurla, the god of singing Millel, the god of hunting Mailer, and so on. I think we should add the name of that traitor to the list," Sarzastin suggested meaningfully. Without a doubt, the traitor he was referring to was the god of liches, Vishalin, who had successfully defected from the Red Robe Magus Association with the help of the god of storms Taros. In the Faerun continent, if a god's name and title were mentioned, the god would be able to hear the next few words, or even a few sentences according to the strength of the god's divine power. When discussing important matters, most people would avoid calling the god's name directly. Although the gods wouldn't always listen to mortals talk about themselves for no reason, there was no harm in being careful. After all, Vishalin and Sarzastin had fought over the position of the chief necromancer in the past, and had almost become mortal enemies, so it wasn't strange for him to make such a suggestion. As long as there was a chance, Sarzastin wouldn't easily let go of his old enemy. No problem. Zhangsheng nodded without hesitation. In any case, not long after the time of troubles began, the second-generation goddess of magic would be killed by the god of guards, Heim, which would directly cause the weave to lose control. The power of every spellcaster would be greatly weakened, and killing Vishalin would become possible. To him, it didn't matter which god he killed. What was important was that he could uncover the secrets of the gods. That's great. I wish us a pleasant cooperation. I look forward to working with you. With the verbal agreement reached, the three of them quickly mobilized the resources in their hands and built a secret base in the middle of the complex terrain of the cliffs. They began to research legendary spells that could kill the gods. Time flew, and 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. Although he was still far from success, he already had some idea of what kind of interesting form of energy the divine power was. During one of his experiments, Zhangsheng had created a strand of energy that was extremely similar to divine power by twisting the weave. However, at this critical moment, a piece of news forced him to put down his research and return to Luskan alone. The reason was simple. Artemis Entreri had finally completed Basha Puk's request and had taken a ship from Port Karen back to the city of 1,000 sails to fulfill his promise. Sensing the calmness and coldness emanating from the assassin, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but ask, "You killed Drizzt?" "No, I defeated him, but I didn't kill him." "You were right. Leaving this shadow behind is beneficial to both me and him. Perhaps the next time we meet, I'll slit his throat with my own hands." Entreri stroked the gem-encrusted dagger as he spoke. After a few months of training and adaptation, he had perfectly integrated the magic energy that filled his reflex nerves with his body. He looked like a sharp blade that was sheathed in its scabbard. Once he attacked, his opponent would not be able to fight back at all. "Well done. You've finally satisfied the desire in your heart. You might have to put in 120% of your energy for the next mission." Zhang Cheng nodded in satisfaction when he heard that the dark elf wasn't dead. Whatever the case may be, Drizzt had countless powers behind him, including the struggle between the gods. He didn't want to complicate matters at this time. "Oh, what do you need me to do?" Entreri didn't like to beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "It's simple. I need you to make a trip to Baldur's Gate and Amen. Contact the Thieves' Guilds in these two places and ensure that their intelligence network will be of use to me next year." "Intelligence network? You're looking for someone or something?" "Yes, but not now. Remember, no matter how unreasonable their request is, agree to it first. If anyone tries to interfere, use your dagger to talk to them personally. Kill a few if necessary to establish your authority." There was no doubt that the reason Zhang Cheng wanted to do this was so that he could find the location of every deity who had been struck down from the mortal realm as soon as possible. After all, there were countless deities roaming the Pharaon continent during the time of troubles, especially those with little influence. Once they found a secluded place to hide, it would be harder to find them than to reach the heavens. The only thing he could do was to cooperate with the Thieves' Guilds who were well-informed as much as possible. "Understood." Entreri nodded lightly. Intimidation and threats were originally his field of expertise, so he didn't need to think too much about it. "Dear, this is the gift I prepared for you. I believe the leaders of the Thieves' Guilds will be overjoyed when they see it." Zhang Cheng handed over a leather pouch with a dozen crystal bottles. These were all magic potions that he had recently concocted. Not only could they greatly increase muscle activity, but they could also slow down the aging of the body. These were the treasures that the leaders of the Thieves' Guilds dreamed of. "I need 1.5 months. After that, you'll have an intelligence network that covers the entire West Coast." As the last word left his mouth, Entreri turned and disappeared at the end of the corridor in the Central Spire's private room. Chapter 491. Midnight, Sirik, Kalimver. These three people couldn't be avoided in the time of troubles. Even though they were still rookies among adventurers and enjoyed the thrill of adventure, it wouldn't be long before their fates changed completely. In a year's time, Midnight would become the third generation's goddess of magic. Sirik would be promoted to become one of the most powerful gods in the world after taking back the clay tablet of fate. Kalimver would become the new god of death, ruling over the underworld. Of course, they didn't know about the great changes that would happen in the future. They were still wandering around as mortals. This was especially true for the future Prince of Lies, Sirik. He was still a good youth who liked to help the weak. He would often steal the wealth of the rich and stuff it into the pockets of the poor. Together with his good friend Kalimver and the priest of the god of love, Eden, he would help the common folk as much as he could. None of them knew that a pair of eyes were watching him from the darkness. "My dear friend, you've been watching this person for a few days. Can you tell me what's so special about him?" Mansong glanced at the scene in the crystal ball, his eyes shining with curiosity. "Do you believe in fate?" Zhang Cheng asked without turning his head, crossing his arms and propping up his chin. "Fate?" Mansong raised his eyebrows in surprise, but then shook his head without thinking. "No, I don't believe in fate. I only believe in the power of magic." "Ha! That answer really suits your identity as an archmage. But if I tell you that it won't take long for him to become one of the most powerful gods in the world under the arrangement of fate, would you believe me?" Zhang Cheng laughed and told his secret. Unfortunately, Mansong didn't take it seriously. He shrugged his shoulders with a smile. "Is this a prophecy? Or are you just joking with me?" "No, I'm just telling you what's about to happen. As for whether you believe me or not, it's up to you. Don't forget that even the most powerful gods can't see through all the secrets in the world. There are always some things that are destined to be incomprehensible and undiscovered. After saying this meaningful sentence, Zhang Cheng picked up a piece of cloth to cover the crystal ball, stood up, and walked outside. In the spacious cave, Sazastin was instructing over 20 assistants to repeatedly check the tens of thousands of mysterious symbols and notches on the ground. This was to ensure that there would be no accidents during the activation. These runes were of different shapes. There were runes commonly used by spellcasters in the Feilu continent, Dalaran runes, Irida runes that Zhang Cheng brought from Azeroth, as well as the demonic runes used by the Burning Legion. After a series of in-depth cooperation, he shared most of the magic knowledge in his mind that did not involve the core secrets to his two allies without any reservation. Mansong and Sazastin did not disappoint him. They only took about 3 weeks to fuse the different systems of magic together and create the huge and complicated magic array before him. Its function was to break the divine shield and create a legendary spell model that could kill gods. Of course, to avoid being noticed by the goddess of magic, the entire process would not trigger the magic net. Instead, it would directly extract energy from the primitive and violent wild magic. As everyone knew, wild magic was known for being difficult to control, so it was likely that it would suddenly become dangerous. How is it? How long will it take to activate it? Zhang Cheng asked as he stared at the base in the center of the magic array that was constantly flashing with arcane light. Soon. I have to say, what you've provided is indeed very interesting. If it weren't for the lack of time, I would definitely study it from beginning to end, Sazastin replied excitedly. Because he was a lich, he did not need to eat or rest at all. He spent almost all his time researching new knowledge. In less than 4 months, he had successfully incorporated dark energy and shadow energy into the existing magic system and created 7 new spells from low to high level. He even learned the technology to mass-produce cheap hellfire. It was foreseeable that after the god-slaying operation, he would be eager to return to Searle and launch a war against the surrounding areas to test the power of these war weapons. Thinking of Elminster's old lover, Simbu, who was in a terrible state, Zhang Cheng subconsciously pursed his lips and teased, "Don't worry, we still have plenty of time." Moreover, when the gods descend as saints, the chosen of the goddess of magic will definitely take action. By then, we will have a chance to kill 1 or 2 of them. Please count me in to deal with Elminster. Mansong took the initiative to step forward, not hiding his hostility toward the great sage of the Shadow Valley. Whether it was the life-and-death struggle between the Zitram Guild and the Harpist League, or the conflict between the 2 of them regarding magic, it was decided that only one of them could survive in the end. Great! It seems that we have reached a consensus on the issue of the chosen of the goddess of magic again, isn't it? Sazastin opened his arms, a meaningful expression appearing on his wrinkled face. Yes, but compared to the chosen of the goddess of magic, I'm more concerned about the god-slaying spell. You know, it's already September, and we have to complete the spell before the end of the year, Zhang Cheng reminded impatiently. Don't worry, I'll give you a satisfactory answer in 10 minutes, Sazastin assured confidently. 10 minutes was not a long time, and it passed in the blink of an eye. When he finished inspecting the last rune, he immediately stood at his position and began to loudly chant an incantation. Seeing this, Mansong followed him to the center of the magic circle and guided the wild magic energy. As for Zhang Cheng, he directly transformed into his dragon form and injected dark energy and shadow energy into the magic circle. With the cooperation of the 3, a golden light appeared out of thin air above the magic circle and slowly landed on the pedestal. Under the effect of this energy, the originally plain surface of the pedestal began to show layers of strange, uneven patterns. The moment the energy was about to run out, a terrifying energy storm came as expected. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by a deafening explosion, the entire base was destroyed by all kinds of energy release. Fire, acid, lightning, sonic boom, frost, negative energy, positive energy. A few of the red-robed mages who could not dodge in time died on the spot, and the rest hurriedly fled in all directions. Only Mansong, Sazastin, and Zhang Cheng did not move at all. When the storm gradually subsided, they rushed to the pedestal in unison to check the patterns left on it. These patterns were not anything else but the original version of a legendary spell model. Chapter 492. The year 1358 of the Valley Calendar, which was also known as the beginning of the modern era in history, had finally arrived without anyone noticing. The three gods of death, Ban, Mirko, and Baal, did not disappoint Zhang Cheng. They carried out an unprecedented act of seeking death. They actually planned to steal the artifact of His Majesty, Ao, the God of Gods, the Fate Tablet, in a futile attempt to rule over life. They had no idea that Ao, the God of Gods, actually represented the crystal wall, which was actually the will of a miniature universe that was isolated from the outside world. To some extent, he was equivalent to an administrator who had obtained the highest authority. No creature could go against him, and he even had the right to change some rules. As expected, the God of Gods was furious. He thought that the gods had been fighting with each other for thousands of years and had forgotten their true duties. Therefore, he sent them to the mortal world and imprisoned all their powers in a mortal body. Of course, due to the difference in nature between gods and mortals, these gods who walked in the material world with mortal bodies were respectfully called saints. With the appearance of one saint after another, the entire Faerun continent fell into chaos. Most people were not mentally prepared to welcome the arrival of so many gods. In addition, the hatred between the gods had lasted for hundreds and thousands of years. Soon, the material world became a battlefield for them to fight with each other. Especially the god of tyranny, Ban, who had just descended to the mortal world, wantonly slaughtered the believers of his brother, Baal. As a result, the god of murder had no choice but to hide and start to make babies. It had to be said that this god was also a weirdo. He did not abstain from eating anything, from dragons and giants to goblins and kobolds. In just 1 or 2 months, he had made thousands of female creatures pregnant with his offspring. Of course, he did not do this just to reproduce, nor to experience the pleasure of mating. He had heard the prophecy of Alan the Wise, so he was preparing for his own resurrection. It should be known that all the children of gods, regardless of gender or race, would inherit something called divinity. Generally speaking, if the god was still alive, the divinity of his children would at most prevent them from aging and dying, and they would also obtain some power that surpassed that of mortals. However, if the god died, the divinity of his children would become the nourishment for his resurrection. As long as his believers were still calling his name, and there were still people who followed his teachings, the god would theoretically never die. Obviously, the reason why Baal had so many children was so that he could use the divinity of his children to return after his death. However, compared to Ban, who was the most powerful of the three gods of death, Baal's actions were a little petty. Once the god of tyranny had arrived, he didn't hesitate to reveal his identity and began to recruit believers. In the blink of an eye, he'd formed a formidable army and captured the second goddess of magic, Mystra, and imprisoned her in the dungeons of Zendel Castle. As god of death's death, Mirko, of course, of death, god of death's death, and the gods of death as a god. It could be said that the arrival of the gods did not bring any trace of happiness to the people living in this land. Instead, it brought a terrible disaster. Almost everywhere, fierce conflicts and wars of varying degrees broke out. No one could stay out of it. While the saints of the gods were fighting with their lives on the line, Luskan still maintained a peaceful atmosphere. The reason was simple. Luskan was located at the northernmost point of the western coast, and further up was the barren Icewind Valley. The population was pitifully small, and the inhabitants were either mercenary merchants or pirates who didn't believe in anything. Gods with power didn't care about this rundown place, and gods without power didn't dare to approach for fear of being killed by the ferocious black dragon. After all, with their mortal bodies, they could be hurt by many weapons and spells. Zhang Cheng was currently sitting in his private room in the central spire, unhurriedly flipping through the reports from the Thieves' Guild. A playful expression appeared on his face, and after a while, he asked without turning his head, "What do you think of these gods?" "What?" Enchili furrowed his brows in confusion. "What I mean is, how do you think these high and mighty gods are different from what you usually imagine?" Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a crazed light, and he didn't hide his desire to kill the gods at all. "I don't feel anything. I've never believed in any god." Enchili shrugged nonchalantly. To be honest, he never dreamed that there would be a day when the gods would be banished from a mortal world. "Haha, that's true." Zhang Cheng nodded lightly. Just as he was about to say something, a portal suddenly appeared out of thin air, and Man Song walked in from the other side. The leader of the Zinarim Guild looked very gloomy at the moment, and he spoke in an incomparably cold tone as soon as he appeared. "When can we begin?" "Oh, what's the matter? Could it be that someone has angered you?" Zhang Cheng teased, even though he already knew the answer. Given the temper of the god of tyranny, Ban, he would definitely seize power as soon as he descended, and personally control the churches and forces under him. Unfortunately, Man Song, who had worked too closely with the Ban church, naturally became the first target to be sacrificed. Be it Zindel Castle or the Zinarim Forest, they were probably all under the control of the god of tyranny. If not for the fact that Man Song was a legendary mage, he would have long been kicked out of the god of tyranny. It was not a good feeling to have one's power snatched away, especially for such an ambitious great mage who was full of power. "Oomph. Stop pretending. Give me a deadline. I don't want to wait any longer." Man Song clenched his staff tightly, his tone full of anger. Shame. Ever since he became a legendary mage, he had never been treated like this, even if the other party was a powerful god. Feeling the burning anger in his heart, Zhang Cheng could not help but raise the corner of his mouth and smiled as he comforted him. "Don't worry, my friend. Now is not the time for us to act. Don't forget, the goddess of magic is not dead yet. Also, did you get the thing I asked you to get?" "Of course. Here, this is what you wanted." Man Song happily took out a simple dagger from his bosom and threw it on the table. Although this thing looked very ordinary on the surface, it exuded an aura that made one's heart palpitate. There was no doubt that this was not an ordinary dagger, but the almost unknown Zasmine dagger, also known as the Godslayer dagger, was a weapon that could really kill gods. It was said that in order to create a weapon that could kill gods, the Nisr Zasmine sect had sacrificed countless people, but in the end, they were all slaughtered by the ancient god of death, Jaeger. Chapter 493. As Zhang Cheng gently stroked the rough iron blade, he felt an energy he had never felt before from it. It was not magic, nor was it divine power. Instead, it was a strong obsession, an unparalleled hatred and enmity towards the gods. It was hard for an ordinary person to imagine that such a dagger could pierce through a divine shield and cause terrible damage to a god. Interesting. I'm more interested in psionic abilities now. Zhang Cheng muttered to himself as he carefully stuffed the dagger into his pocket. The reason he'd asked for Zasmine's dagger was not only for research purposes, but also to obtain a trump card that could turn the situation around at a critical moment. After all, while the god-slaying spell had been completed, it hadn't been tested in practice. Who knew how effective it would be? Therefore, having a weapon that could kill gods was very important at this time. Man Song obviously didn't care about this, and impatiently urged, "I've already fulfilled all your requests. Tell me, how long do we have to wait?" "Calm down. Patience is a virtue. You shouldn't get angry over a little bit of power. I guarantee that it won't be long before the person who made you angry is killed by his nemesis." Zhang Cheng comforted, pursing his lips into a smile that wasn't quite a smile. "You stole the tablet of fate from Io, the god of gods, and you still want to live?" Reality proved that the three death gods had dug their own graves. Ban had died at the hands of the god of loyalty and courage. Baal had been killed by Sirik, and Mirko had been beaten up by Elminster and the others in Deepwater City. In any case, none of them had survived the time of troubles. Although Ban had successfully revived with the help of his son, the other two were not so lucky. In Zhang Cheng's eyes, The time of troubles was essentially a great purge of the gods against the gods. It was also a stern warning, so there was no need to act too early to avoid being discovered and being attacked by the other gods. As long as Cyric hadn't gathered the Tablet of Fate, the gods would have to obediently stay in the material world. As for those who tried to take advantage of the situation, the second goddess of magic, Mystra, was killed by the god of guardians, and the goddess of commerce, Wajing, was imprisoned in the harem of the Umbra monarch. None of them had a good ending. What about Sazastin? Where has he been these days? Mansong suddenly discovered that his other ally was not around, and his eyes revealed a puzzled look. He's looking for his old friend. I think it's better if we don't disturb him for the time being, Zhang Cheng hinted meaningfully. I see. Mansong was smart enough to realize that they were looking for the lich god Visharan. Just as he was about to probe further into the next plan, a raven covered in black feathers suddenly flew in. There was a letter tube tied to its leg that was specially used to hold a note. Without any hesitation, Zhang Cheng took out a crumpled piece of paper in front of everyone. There wasn't a single character on it, only a black that looked like it had been accidentally dripped with ink. However, it was this black that caused his pupils to contract violently. He then opened his mouth and ordered without turning his head, "Valindra, inform everyone to get ready. The hunt has begun." The hunt had begun. When the beautiful moon elf heard this, she couldn't help but shiver all over. She hurriedly nodded, understood. Perhaps others wouldn't know the meaning of the hunt, but as a direct subordinate, she knew very well that the so-called hunt didn't refer to the hunt of beasts, but the hunt of gods. After watching Valindra disappear at the end of the corridor, Mansong finally couldn't help but ask, "What happened? Why did you suddenly change your mind?" "It's nothing. I just received news that the goddess of magic had just been rescued by a group of adventurers." Zhang Cheng directly released a ball of fire and burned the note to ashes. In order to prevent important information from leaking out, he secretly created a series of meaningless symbols and pictures to represent different meanings. A drop of ink represented the goddess of magic being rescued by Cyric's team. Although he wasn't sure how these rookies managed to get the goddess of magic out without alerting the god of tyranny and the layers of guards, he knew that this worrisome goddess would immediately attempt to return to the divine realm and expose the conspiracy of the three death gods to Io. Unfortunately, she met the merciless god of guardians, Heim, who only knew how to uphold his duty. In the end, Mystra, who had a mortal body, couldn't defeat the god of guardians who wasn't suppressed at all and was directly hammered to death. Following that, the weave of Faerun continent began to go out of control. This also meant that the power of all spellcasters, including the gods, was greatly restricted. They could no longer predict the arrival of danger in advance, and could no longer use magic to monitor what was happening in distant places. In short, everyone would become deaf and blind. Mansong subconsciously frowned, as if he couldn't understand Zhang Cheng's strange way of doing things. However, considering that it was very much in line with his intentions to act earlier, he reluctantly agreed. After a short discussion, and with the limited information they had on hand, the two quickly locked onto the god of tyranny, Gargos, who was active in the southern region of Tysil. As the saying went, pick the soft persimmon first. First of all, this third-rate devil didn't have any decent allies among the gods, so even if he accidentally leaked the information, he wouldn't have to worry about retaliation. Secondly, his strength was among the weakest of the gods, and he couldn't even fully understand the meaning of divine power. His mind was filled with the disguises and schemes of devils, and he wasn't very good at fighting. Lastly, and most importantly, this guy was currently in Tysil, a country that was in the midst of civil strife. No matter how intense the situation was, as long as he pushed the blame to the local warlords, nobles, or bandits, it would serve to confuse the public. As the first target of the hunt, Zhang Cheng didn't care too much about who it was. After all, he wanted to get a corpse and slowly study it. His mind was filled with countless crazy thoughts, and he didn't just want to kill one or two gods. He wanted to massacre the gods and kill all that he could. The thought of his hands being stained with the blood of the gods gave him an indescribable feeling of excitement. The observant man, Song, undoubtedly noticed this, and immediately raised the danger level of this ally of his by a few notches. At the same time, he secretly increased his vigilance. After all, there was no lack of terrifying lunatics on this land. For example, the crazy wizard who dug holes at the foot of the mountain all day long, Hallis Blackrobe, and the crazy founder of the dragon cult, Sam Astor. Chapter 494. Carmen's was an inconspicuous small town located on the banks of the Youth River. It was located to the south of the kingdom of Tyresel, close to Karanshan in the south. Not only was the climate warm and humid, but it was also rich in delicious fruit wine. Although the residents did not have a good life due to the continuous civil war, it was still much better than other places in Tyresel. At least they could barely fill their stomachs. However, just a few days ago, an ordinary merchant suddenly came to this place and brought a strange change to this originally peaceful small town. "Good morning, Mr. Merchant." A woodcutter who was about to leave the town to chop firewood in the suburbs bowed to an old man of about 50 years old. "Haha, good morning." The old man took off his somewhat gray hat and returned the greeting. From his weather-beaten face, it was almost impossible to recognize that this was a high and mighty god. That was right. He was none other than the first target that Zhang Cheng was going to hunt. The god of cruel officials, Gagas. It had to be said that compared to most gods who openly gathered believers, his style of hiding his head and showing his tail could be said to be a disgrace to the gods. But there was no other way. He had too many enemies, not to mention the good gods who were originally extremely hostile to the evil camp. Just the evil camp alone had offended the god of tyranny Ban, the body of murder ball, the goddess of night Shar, the goddess of poison and disease Talona. Among them, there were several great divine powers, many mid-level divine powers, and countless low-level divine powers. Basically, they could be said to be the common enemy of all the gods. What was more frightening was that Gagas did not even have a single ally in the pantheon. Usually, he relied on hiding in the 9 levels of hell, relying on cooperation with the various lords to avoid the pursuit of the gods. But now, the god of gods did not waste any time and directly struck all the gods down to the mortal world, causing him to be completely unprepared. He could only find a place to hide first and wait for the commotion outside to calm down before thinking of a way to the distant east to search for the ruins of the ancient Amaska Empire. As a god who was born as a devil, he knew very well that this once glorious magic civilization had developed teleportation technology to the extreme and could even open a portal to another universe. If he could find some precious knowledge and treasures from the ruins left behind, he would be able to bypass the god of guards, Heim, and return to the divine realm first. Of course, before he left, he had to hide his identity. Otherwise, if he was exposed, he would definitely be beaten to death by countless enemies. Watching the mortals bustling about for their livelihood, Gargos pursed his lips and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "How pitiful! How foolish! Maybe I should give them some mental hints and let them play an interesting Game of Thrones." Agree. Following the familiar voice, Zhang Cheng appeared in his human form and bowed elegantly. "Who are you?" Gagas clearly did not expect that someone could quietly avoid his powerful perception, and his eyes revealed strong curiosity and vigilance. No matter what, he was still a god. Even if he was sealed in the body of a mortal, he still possessed strength that far exceeded that of an ordinary person. Most importantly, due to the great strength that devils were born with, as well as the knowledge that they had learned over a long period of time, he was not only a powerful warrior and thief, but also an outstanding priest and legendary wizard. This also meant that he could easily destroy an army with his strength alone. Unless it was another god who could use divine power to launch an attack, there was no need to worry too much. Who I am is not important. The important thing is you, the great god of ruthless officials, Gargos. You'll die here today. Zhang Cheng sneered as he made a death declaration. For some reason, when he felt the divine power contained in the other party's body, he suddenly had an uncontrollable urge to destroy, as if something was attracting him. "Kill me?" Do you know what you were saying? Gargos's pupils flickered with a dark red light. That was a sign that the evil divine power was boiling. It also indicated that the god's heart was filled with anger. How many years had it been? Ever since he became a god, he had not been provoked by mortals. Even the devils in the hell of Bator regarded him as a hidden great lord. But now, a reckless little dragon actually dared to say that he would kill him. This was a blatant insult. Of course I know what I am saying. Do you know why I chose you as my first target? Because you are the weakest among the gods. You also don't have any decent allies. So on one hand, it is relatively easy to kill you, and on the other hand, it can prevent other gods from discovering you. Zhang Cheng did not hide his contempt for the god of ruthless officials and continued to mock him. He was not wasting time, nor was he seeking momentary pleasure. He was trying to buy time for his subordinates and allies to cast spells. Legendary magic was not a spell in the ordinary sense. Its complexity was far beyond what an outsider could imagine. Whether it was preparation or channeling, it required a very long time, and in theory, its power could be increased infinitely. In order to pierce through the divine protection in one blow, Mansong was leading 6 high-level assistants to quickly chant spells, while the rest were trying their best to suppress the magical waves produced during the process. They clearly knew that this spell could only be used once. If it did not work, then with the god of ruthless officials' sinister and cunning personality, he would definitely escape without a care for anything else. It would be difficult to find him again. However, Gargos was not an idiot. After a brief moment of anger, he quickly realized that this could very well be a trap. He began to patrol the surroundings, trying to find the hidden enemy. Just as he was about to make a move to test the waters, a terrifying energy suddenly fell from the sky and smashed down. As there were no signs, Gargos had no time to dodge at all. He was squeezed and torn apart by the terrifying energy on the spot. The divine protection that he was so proud of was destroyed in less than a few seconds. Not only did he reveal his true appearance as a devil, but his entire body was also badly mutilated. Damn it, what did you do? He widened his eyes in shock and anger, his face full of disbelief. I said just now, I'm going to kill you. Zhang Cheng opened his mouth and threw out a dimensional anchor that could stop all teleportation spells. He then transformed into his dragon form and pounced forward. No, how dare you? Accompanied by an extremely miserable roar, the black dragon waved its sharp claws and tore open the chest of the god of ruthless officials, digging out the beating black heart. Chapter 495. Ha 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 ha. Interesting. Too interesting. Is this a god? Holding up the bloody heart, Zhang Cheng's eyes shone with a maniacal light. This was because the moment he dug out the heart, he suddenly realized that Gargos had not died. Instead, he had concentrated all of his remaining divine power and will in the heart to create a powerful artifact. Anyone who dug out their own heart and replaced it with this thing would immediately gain unimaginable power. In addition, while gaining power, they would also inevitably be affected by the will of the god of cruel officials, becoming more and more sinister and cunning. Eventually, they would lose themselves and be completely devoured, becoming nourishment for the resurrection of the god. However, compared to the god of Murder Bale's boldness and means of spreading seeds throughout the world, it was obviously not just a little bit better. No matter what, this heart was equivalent to an extension of Gargos himself. Moreover, the person who replaced this heart could absorb all of the other party's power to strengthen himself by continuously killing the devils of Batsu. In short, even if the gods were suppressed in the state of saints, they could still use various methods to avoid death or leave behind an opportunity for resurrection. Compared to most life forms, the gods were more like a pure projection of consciousness. Whether it was divine power, saints, or incarnations, they were all just external manifestations, just like how people control characters in the game world through the internet. Killing them in the ordinary sense would only destroy their bodies that were controlled by God. Their consciousness would still remain intact in another unknown place. As for the churches and believers, they were equivalent to the network cable that connected the gods and the material world. As long as the network cable was not completely cut off, the gods would have a chance to return again, just like how a character in a game would be deleted and then rebuild again. Therefore, to completely kill a god, the most important thing was not to destroy the game character he controlled, but to completely eradicate the churches and their believers, erase all traces left in the material world, and ensure that no one would ever call out his name and spread his teachings. In this way, the gods who lost their network cable would be completely forgotten because they would never be able to connect to the material world. In short, mortals could not really kill a god. The battle between gods was more like a dangerous game, and mortals were just NPCs in this game. Unfortunately, Zhang Cheng was now one of the NPCs. However, this NPC was a little special. In a short moment, he saw through the secrets hidden behind the gods. Of course, he had to thank His Majesty, the God of gods, for imprisoning all the gods in the bodies of mortals. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for him to discover the drastic changes that happened in just a few seconds after the heart was dug out. We did it! We killed a god. Manson had come close at some point, clenching his fists excitedly. Ah, that's right. We killed a god. Now, this body belongs to you. Take it back and study it. Zhang Cheng casually threw Gargos's corpse over. Although it was of no use, a god's body, it was a rare treasure for other mages. Regardless of whether it was the incomparably precious divine blood or a body that had lost its heart, they could all be made into powerful magic tools or even divine weapons by powerful spellcasters. The latter, in particular, only needed a simple embalming treatment and then a high-level necromancy spell to reawaken a powerful demigod mummy warrior. Even an adult dragon, standing at the top of the food chain, would be torn to pieces in a few moves. However, Manson was not a fool. He recognized the value of the black heart at a glance. He narrowed his eyes and seemed to be hesitating whether to snatch it immediately. As everyone knew, the alliance between the evil camps was mostly maintained by common interests. Once the spoils were not evenly divided, it was normal for them to fall out immediately. Sensing the hostility emanating from his ally, Zhang Cheng did not restrain himself. Instead, he showed an even crazier smile. The flames in his eyes were constantly flickering as if he was looking forward to something. As the smell of gunpowder between the two grew stronger, the others also realized the seriousness of the problem. They stood beside their leaders, ready to draw their swords. Just as the atmosphere became more and more tense, Manson, who had a tense face, suddenly squeezed out a smile and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Well, this time I agree with your way of distribution. But next time, I have to be the first to pick the spoils." "Sure," Zhang Cheng agreed without hesitation. "Great. Then what about our alliance?" "There's no problem with our alliance. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation." In just a few sentences, the two who almost fell out with each other returned to their previous friendly state. It was as if the tense atmosphere was just an illusion. However, both of them knew that this was only on the surface. The cracks of distrust had already appeared, and it was only a matter of time before they fought over the distribution of benefits. After obtaining the corpse of the god of cruel officials, Manson did not stop. After collecting some of the remaining god's blood, he quickly disappeared without a trace with his subordinates. It was obvious that he had returned to his secret base to secretly study the mysteries of the god's immortality. Seeing that Manson and his subordinates had all left, Valindra immediately approached and asked carefully, "Master, many residents in the town have discovered us. Do you think we should get rid of them?" "Haha, no need. Come, help me put this heart in." Zhang Cheng cut open his chest again with a ferocious expression. His entire body emitted a chilling aura. Put it in? Are you going to use it to replace your original heart?" Valindra subconsciously shuddered. "Not replace. I want two hearts. Do you understand?" Zhang Cheng explained in a meaningful manner. Without a doubt, he wanted to use this body for an experiment. It was an extremely crazy experiment, and that was to devour the power of the god and make it a part of his body. "Understood." The moon elf nodded hurriedly and took the bloody heart. She began to cut the blood vessels with a sharp dagger and connected the heart to the original heart through necromancy magic. Even though she was not a mage who specialized in necromancy, this kind of small-scale modification was not a problem for her. In less than 10 minutes, Gargo's heart was installed. Feeling a wave of evil, filthy, and rotten divine power begin to flow along the blood vessels in his body, Zhang Cheng suddenly opened his eyes. Balls of blood-red light burst forth and enveloped the entire town in an instant. All the ordinary people who came into contact with it screamed in pain without exception. Then, they slowly melted like candles and turned into a sticky, unknown substance. Chapter 496. Asterisk Bathump. 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 Asterisk as the second heart started to beat violently. A thin tube extended from the sphere of flesh and soul and pierced into the heart cavity, continuously transferring the life force it had forcefully seized. In less than a minute, the terrifying wound on his chest had completely healed. At the same time, Zhang Cheng's body in his dragon form had expanded to a terrifying 30 meters. Just by raising his head, he was close to the height of a 10-story building. The sturdy black scales on his body had a strange luster, as if they were covered in a layer of flowing liquid. Power. Unparalleled power. Power that could not be described with words. He could even feel that his life form had been elevated to an unprecedented level. Arcane spells, dark energy, shadow energy, and many other energies had formed an unprecedented balance in his body and could be transformed through the divinity flowing in his blood. That's right. Even though Zhang Cheng still did not understand what divinity was, there was no doubt that it could help solve the problem that had been bothering him for a long time, and that was the problem of the transformation between different types of energy. Just as he was about to further test the other abilities of this heart, Valindra finally could not help but ask, "Master, are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine, better than ever." Zhang Cheng slowly opened his eyes, revealing a pair of terrifying eyes. Through the beast-like vertical pupils, the moon elf could only feel every cell in her body trembling. After a full minute, she forced herself to calm down and carefully probed. "Then what do you think we should do next? Return to Luskan, or—" Before she could finish her sentence, the originally stable weave around them suddenly became distorted, spewing out large amounts of fire, acid, positive energy, negative energy, and lightning without warning. It was as if it had completely lost control. Following that, the hearts of all the mages twitched violently, as if they had lost the most important thing in their lives. The goddess of magic has fallen. Valindra knelt on the ground with a thump, her face full of pain and despair. Not only her, but the other Dragonborn mages around her had similar reactions. In fact, at this moment, all the arcane spellcasters in the Faerun continent knew about this historical event that could have a terrifying impact on the entire world. The weave that had gone out of control was like a flood or an avalanche, bringing unimaginable disaster to the living beings that lived on this land. Many innocent civilians were torn apart by the magic energy before they realized what was happening. Some were corroded into half-elemental and half-undead life forms, wandering aimlessly. In addition, many sorcerers and sorcerers were unable to accept the fact that they had lost the power they were so proud of. They went crazy and eventually chose to commit suicide. The goddess of magic was so important that once she died, no one could restrain the violent primordial magic energy. However, in Zhang Cheng's eyes, this also represented an opportunity for him to use his magical powers without worrying about being monitored. He first glanced at his subordinate who was in great pain, then immediately opened his mouth and roared, "Calm down. Look at how pitiful you are." Did the death of the goddess of magic mean the disappearance of magic? No, magic would never disappear. It is merely displayed in the most primitive and direct state before you. Feel it, accept it, conquer it, command it. You're mages. You're the master of magic. But master, we have no way of coming into contact with the violent magic energy. The moon elf raised her head, her beautiful face full of tears. "No, how do you know you can't if you haven't tried?" As he spoke, Zhang raised a claw and began to frantically condense the uncontrollable energy around him. After a few seconds, a ball that was a mixture of different forms and spinning at high speed appeared out of thin air. It was so perfect and balanced that even positive energy and negative energy, which were mutually exclusive, did not erupt into conflict. Look, this is magic, the most primitive energy that has not been modified by any rules. What you need to do is to temporarily forget the convenience of the weave and familiarize yourself with it bit by bit from the beginning. At the same time, you need to modify the spell model. Believe me, although this will waste some time, the benefits will be much greater than with the weave. Because you will no longer be restricted by the goddess of magic, you will be able to reach a deeper level and even create powerful spells that even the gods fear. As soon as the last word was spoken, Zhang threw out the magic ball in his hand. The next second, boom, the uncontrollable energy immediately exploded with an unprecedented impact. Then, it continuously tore at each other and squeezed against each other, causing the space to collapse. A black hole the size of a fingernail. Although it only existed for less than a second, all matter within 100 meters was sucked in. After the black hole disappeared, only a circular hole with a diameter of more than 20 meters and a depth of more than 10 meters was left. Without a doubt, in terms of power, this was a legendary spell through and through. It was similar to another legendary spell called Annihilation Black Hole. Regrettably, the black hole that Zhang created required the weave to go out of control. Once the goddess of magic regained control of the weave, he would no longer be able to draw unlimited energy from it. Yes, there are no limits. We can now use the magic energy as we wish. We don't need to be limited to constantly coming into contact with the weave. Ha ha! Valindra seemed to have been enlightened. He struggled to stand up and let out a maniacal laugh, his eyes as bright as the stars in the sky. That's right. Great master. I can feel it. The power of primitive magic is all around us. I can still barely control it. Power. This is true power. In an instant, the other few dragon wizards also became extremely fanatical. One of them even took the initiative to come into contact with the violent primitive energy, trying to tame a small part of it. No one knew what the collapse of the weave meant to the entire Pharaon continent. Moreover, no one knew that a few minutes before the collapse of the weave, the god of cruel officials, Gagos, had been killed by a group of mortal spellcasters. His heart was now in the body of a black dragon. Moreover, this dragon was so crazy and filled with an endless desire to destroy, trying to massacre the gods who had fallen into the mortal realm. Just like what was said before, the hunt has begun. It was just that no one knew who was the hunter and who was the prey this time. Chapter 497. Insanity was an intense mental state, but it was also a terrifying and addictive disease. In a short span of a month and a half since his first successful god hunt, Zhang had ambushed 8 relatively weaker gods. He'd killed 7 of them, while one escaped with heavy injuries. Manson and Sarzastan had maintained a close relationship with him at the start, but they gradually realized that the Black Dragon's insanity had far exceeded their expectations. They'd decisively chosen to part ways. After all, they'd already obtained what they wanted. They planned to focus on researching the corpses of the gods instead of taking the huge risk of being surrounded by the other gods and launching attacks again and again. However, Zhang had already lost control of himself. Destruction and slaughter were like a drug, constantly tormenting his every nerve. At the same time, every time he killed a god, he'd transplant the blood or organs that contained the most divinity and divine force into his own body. As the divine force of different factions and attributes fused and intertwined in his body, he began to understand what divinity was and what divinity was. The latter, as the name suggested, was a duty that the gods had to fulfill. For example, the fallen goddess of magic, Mystra, her main duty was to maintain the stability of the weave and promote the prosperity and spread of magical technology, allowing more people to enjoy the benefits of magic. Another example was the god of death, Mirko. His duty was to judge and protect the souls of the dead, sending them to where they should go. In short, every god had their own scope of authority. They were like bureaucrats in a political system, each in charge of their own domain. While they were in charge of these domains, they would also obtain absolute authority over their domain, as well as the corresponding special divine force. Without a divinity, even if a creature had divinity and divine force, they wouldn't be called a god. They wouldn't be recognized by the other gods or the god of gods. This meant that it was impossible to become a god by killing a god. Otherwise, the corpses of the gods who died during the time of troubles would have been snatched clean by mortals who wanted to become gods. Cyric wouldn't have had a scheme so hard to obtain the Fate Tablet and hand it over to Io in exchange for the three gods of death's divinity and power. As for divinity, it was a key that opened the path to transcendence and immortality. Zhang Cheng didn't know how to describe it in words. Sometimes it was like a kind of understanding of the world and the universe, and sometimes it was like a feeling of life. Through the vast knowledge accumulated over a long period of time, or a direct gift from the gods, some intelligent beings and the children of the gods would create a type of energy that matched their own characteristics from nothing. And this special energy was divinity. It was not arcane, not shadow, not dark energy, not positive energy, not negative energy, and not any known energy. Most importantly, divinity could be plundered by killing gods, sons of gods, and divine creatures that possessed divinity. Once the divinity accumulated to a certain extent, it would give birth to divine power of the corresponding attribute. Normally, if one mastered the above 2 points, one would basically be a reserve god who was half a step into the pantheon. Even compared to a real god, they were only one clergy away. In theory, they already had most of the characteristics of a god. There was no doubt that Zhangcheng was in this state. Due to the large amount of divinity he had plundered, his lava-like eyes had turned into a dazzling gold, constantly exuding endless majesty. Even Valindra didn't dare to raise his head and look at him directly. Once they met, he would immediately be intimidated and unable to move for at least half a minute. Asterisk clang, clang, asterisk asterisk in an underground mine 40 kilometers away from Luskan. Thousands of dwarven craftsmen were embedding pieces of metal with the properties of Illyrian steel, mithril, adamantine, cold steel, enchanted thorium, arcanite, elementium ingots, and many other magical metals onto the black dragon's thick scales. With the help of the weak light, one could clearly see that these pieces of metal were embedded with complex runes and gems. Every time a piece was successfully embedded, it would emit a dazzling light. When the light disappeared, the piece of metal would become one with the pieces around it, and no spots or cracks could be seen. Great Master, your armor will take at most another 10 hours to complete. When the time comes, the whole world will tremble under your wings. Shuang stepped forward and carefully complimented. Even though he had once been an insufferably arrogant black dragon, he didn't dare to show the slightest bit of dissatisfaction with the majestic dragon in front of him. The reason was simple. With the help of the power of divinity, Zhangcheng had now expanded to a length of 130 meters. When he sat on all fours, he was more than 20 meters tall. There was no other dragon in the entire Faron continent that was bigger than him. His size alone was enough to crush most ancient dragons. In fact, his body had already reached its current state, and there was no room for further growth. Simply put, it was fixed. Otherwise, he wouldn't have imitated the wings of death and covered himself with a layer of indestructible alloy magic armor. In order to ensure that the pieces of metal were complete, had various defensive capabilities, and did not affect the casting of spells, he had almost exhausted all of his inventory. He even personally went to the Underdark to plunder 2 underground dwarf towns, and finally gathered rare adamantine and gems with great difficulty. Once completed, he was sure that even if he faced a greater divine power in the form of a saint, he would not be able to escape unscathed. Looking at his left front claw that was completely covered by the extremely gorgeous armor, Zhang Cheng smiled and replied, "Tremble? No, I don't just want to tremble. I want to destroy. Just watch. This is just the beginning. When I complete the whole plan, the gods will usher in their dusk. You seem to be very hostile to the gods. The half-dead silver dragon Mattis frowned subconsciously. Ha ha. No, I just want to see what a world without gods looks like. Zhang Qing opened his mouth and laughed wildly without restraint. He didn't know if it was the effect of the divinity, but he had been falling into madness more and more recently, and the time he had to calm down was getting less and less. It was as if he had completely lost control. One had to know that the madness now was different from the irrational madness before. He knew very well what he was doing and also understood the consequences of doing so. But he couldn't help but want to try it, and then savor the intense excitement that came from breaking all restraints. It was as if the divinity had stimulated all the latent desires in his mind. Whether it was the whispers of the ancient gods or the painful and desperate emotions from the tear of Nesario, they all disappeared without a trace. Instead, they were replaced by a long-suppressed passion. Chapter 498. There had always been a terrible legend in the north among a very small number of people, and that was that the demigod who had once created the glorious era of the Netheril civilization, Elam, was not dead. On the contrary, he had foreseen the arrival of the disaster in advance. So he took the initiative to abandon his floating city and came to a city of mind flayers called Eliento. He taught these brain-eating monsters arcane spells and created the first batch of mind flayers and liches in the Faerun continent. However, he was not satisfied with this. Immediately after, he created the world's first undead creature with a main brain and completely merged with it through a magic ritual, becoming the famous sage of Eliento. Although so many years had passed, there were still people who kept mentioning his story. It was said that some people took the initiative to offer a fragment of their own mind or a newly invented legendary spell in order to obtain ancient secrets and knowledge from Elam. No one knew how smart he had become over the years, and no one knew how many kinds of magic and psychic abilities he had mastered. In short, almost everyone who knew about this thought that Elam had become the most powerful spellcaster on this continent, even more powerful than the gods. However, today, a strange visitor broke the peace of Eliento. The ancient liches and mind flayers serving Elam did not even cause the slightest obstruction, and the other party broke into the brain located in the core area. Without a doubt, the intruder was none other than Zhang Cheng, who had just completed the embedding of the magic armor. With the inherent advantage of being a dragon, he directly skipped over the empty sky above the city, lifted the roof, and came to a place that looked like a human's exposed brain. However, the brain in front of him was magnified countless times, as if several cars were placed side by side. It was really a little hair-raising. Before he could finish observing the surrounding environment, a low and elegant voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "Welcome, soul from another world. Do you know, I've been looking forward to this meeting for a few months. You know me?" A trace of surprise appeared on Zhang Cheng's ferocious face. "Of course. Do you think I stay here all day without moving? What do you think I rely on to pass the time? What's more, your appearance forcibly changed the fate of some people. How could I not notice it? Prophecy magic? I see." Zhang Cheng nodded thoughtfully and quickly transformed into his human form. He placed one hand on his chest and bowed respectfully. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Honorable Sage Eliento, the greatest spellcaster in human history, Sir Eliento." "Haha, you seem to be full of respect for me." The huge brain trembled slightly as it asked with a smile that was not a smile. "That's right. Be it your long list of experiences and creations, or your current state of successfully fusing arcana and mental powers, they are all enough to make me humble. There's a saying in my hometown, knowledge is power, and you happen to possess countless pieces of knowledge that I long for." Zhang Cheng didn't beat around the bush and directly expressed his intentions. In order to find this abandoned city, he had spent a lot of effort and even made some shady deals with the slave hunters of the underground world. His goal was simple. He wanted to obtain as much of the lost magic techniques of the Netheril era as possible, as well as the fusion of arcane spells and psychic abilities. "I like your straightforwardness. But I believe you should know that if you want to get knowledge from me, you have to pay a certain price. Are you sure you have enough to pay the price?" After saying that, Eliento emitted a strange wave. After the surrounding mind flayers, vengeful spirits, and liches sensed it, they immediately turned and disappeared without a trace. Zhang Cheng gently swung his barbed tail and replied confidently, "Don't worry. I promise that after you see this memory, you will immediately be interested in what I have to offer." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his front paw and gently touched his head, then threw a ball of white light into the brain. Instantly, a tentacle rose into the air and caught the ball of white light. The next second, Eliento saw the terrifying ancient gods, the transformation of Azeroth by the titans born on the planet, and how Sargeras fell and created the burning legion that destroyed countless worlds, as well as the highly developed arcane civilization of Irida. The Well of Eternity, the ancient war, the division between the Night Elves and the High Elves, the rise of humans, and the establishment of the magic kingdom of Dalaran, until the endless undead army under the control of the Lich King. There was no doubt that this was an illusion that Zhang Cheng created by combining the memories of his previous life and the current situation of Azeroth. Although there were many fictional parts, he was confident that he could whet the appetite of the greatest spellcaster in human history. This was because he knew what was the most attractive thing to a spellcaster: knowledge. Knowledge and magic systems from another world. As a traveler who constantly traveled between worlds, he never minded sharing knowledge as long as it could bring him benefits in the end. After half an hour, when Eliento finally digested the contents of the white ball of light, he exclaimed through the telepathic connection, "Amazing! Very amazing! Tell me, how much do you know about those huge and complex knowledge systems?" "Not much. So far, I've only mastered 30% of Irida's arcane civilization, 5% of the Burning Legion's dark energy and shadow knowledge, most of the knowledge of the magic kingdom of Dalaran and the High Elves, and finally some experience about the evolution and transformation of life. How about it? Are you interested in making some exchanges?" Zhang Cheng licked his lips and probed meaningfully. "I'd love to, but for the sake of fairness, you'd better make a list, and I'll make a list too. Then we'll each choose the parts we're most interested in and bargain until both sides are satisfied. What do you think?" Elam suggested enthusiastically. He had lived for too long, and there were no secrets in this world for him. But now, how could he not be tempted by the sudden appearance of knowledge and magic systems from another world? If it weren't for Zhang Cheng's entire body brimming with the light of divinity and the armor that had fused with who knew how many kinds of technology, Elam would have tried to directly invade his brain and seize what he wanted. Chapter 499. Exchanging unknown knowledge was a complicated and huge project, especially when there was little trust between the two parties. In order to avoid being cheated, both Zhang Cheng and Elam were very careful at the beginning. They tried not to come into contact with the core knowledge and technology that were costly, but instead chose things that weren't too important but could distinguish the value of the system. After a full 10 hours, they had exchanged hundreds of spells, as well as many magical item creation, scroll copying, and alchemy techniques. In the end, Zhang Cheng really didn't want to waste time on endless probing and pointed to the last few pages of the list. "I want the core of Misra and all the technology to create the floating city." "Oh, you want to create your own floating city?" Elam's tone revealed a hint of surprise. "No," Zhang Cheng shook his head. "I don't have such plans for now. I'm just a little curious. What kind of magic can make a mountain float in the air for a long time? And what kind of technology can ensure an endless supply of magical energy from the surrounding environment?" You know what? You're not the first person to want to obtain information on the floating city, and you won't be the last. But I have to say that the floating city is not as powerful as you think, especially the core of Misra. It needs a relatively stable state of energy input, which is the weave. It can't directly draw power from the violent primordial energy, or else it wouldn't have fallen from the sky when the disaster struck. Of course, the most important thing is that the price of this knowledge is very expensive, Elam explained patiently. "I've already decided. Please state your price. Zhang Cheng was obviously not interested in listening to this, and straightforwardly put on the posture of a transaction. The reason was simple. As the most important cornerstone of the ancient Netheril civilization, the core of Misra meant that it didn't need to expend too much energy to maintain magical effects, provided that one stayed within the radius of influence of the core of Misra. No spellcaster wouldn't desire such a treasure. Moreover, there were several powerful spells to create the floating city. One could flatten a mountain in an instant, while the other two could reverse gravity and make thousands of tons of rocks float in the air. Even as large-scale destructive spells, their power was still considerable. All right, if you insist. Elam sighed indifferently. He quickly scanned the list in front of him and tapped twice on it with his tentacles. I want the method to create and control dark energy and the demonic rune system. Zhang Cheng narrowed his eyes and hesitated for a moment before nodding. No problem. Let's exchange. As soon as he finished speaking, both of them extracted the corresponding memory fragments from their minds and handed them to the other. In an instant, the massive amount of knowledge was directly transmitted to the cerebral cortex through the spiritual connection. Then, it was stored in the hippocampus from the cerebral cortex until it finally entered the long-term memory area. For a moment, the vast amount of complex and unfamiliar knowledge made Zhang Cheng feel dizzy. Fortunately, he was now an out-and-out divine creature. Otherwise, this act of forcibly injecting memories into his brain would cause a cerebral hemorrhage or even brain death. He didn't know how much time had passed. Perhaps it was a few minutes, perhaps it was an hour or two. In short, by the time he fully understood this unfamiliar knowledge, Elam had begun to try to distort the arcane energy and create a large amount of green dark energy flames. Although he could not fully control it, there was no doubt that he had brought this powerful and evil power into his control. How do you feel? The great arcanist asked casually as he fiddled with the power he had just obtained. It's okay. It shouldn't be a big problem. Let's continue. Zhang Cheng shook his head, which was a little dizzy. If I'm not wrong, the next thing you want should be to create the undead Cortex Prime and merge with it, right? Elam teased with a half-smile. Yes, I found that most creatures in this world have an upper limit to their intelligence, and this upper limit is determined by their brain capacity. Only the Cortex Prime that can infinitely increase its size can get rid of this limit. Zhang Cheng did not intend to hide it and gave a straightforward answer. In fact, his two biggest goals for this trip were to obtain the entire set of construction technology for the floating city, and the other was to obtain the magic ritual to merge with the Cortex Prime. I don't understand. You are already a divine creature. In principle, as long as you continue on this path, you will inevitably obtain the authority of divine power. At that time, the attributes of mortals will be nothing at all. Why go through the trouble of doing something superfluous? I never intended to become one of the gods. Plundering divinity is just to figure out what is going on with the gods and how to really kill them. Perhaps you won't believe me when I say this, but even the dragon body that I have now is only a temporary shell. I don't mind using it for some crazy and dangerous experiments. I see. I understand. Your body didn't enter this world, right? Elam seemed to have realized something and probed meaningfully. Zhang Cheng cracked a smile and nodded. That's right. So I don't care about death at all. It can even be said that I have no scruples. Very interesting. May I ask if you can come to this world because of some kind of magic technology or because of some accident? It's because of a piece of parchment. In general, I'm more like a puppet under control or a mercenary on a mission. It may be a bit complicated to explain, but you should understand after reading this. After saying that, Zhang Cheng calmly took out the magical parchment scroll. Perhaps he hoped that the greatest spellcaster in human history could crack the secret behind the parchment, or at least give him some guidance. That was why he made such a bold move. However, the moment the parchment scroll appeared, it released a dazzling golden light for some reason. The next second, boom, a terrifying energy fell from the sky. It smashed onto Elam's head, even though he had foreseen the danger in advance, and propped up a huge protective barrier. But these shields, woven together by dozens of protective spells, did not even last for 10 seconds and shattered on the spot. The left side of his brain was also blasted into a bloody mess by the remaining energy. Fortunately, this energy came and went quickly. After smashing the left side of his brain, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Chapter 500. I'm very sorry. Please believe me, this was not a deliberate attack. I'm not too sure what happened either. Zhang Chen quickly put away the parchment scroll and explained in a serious tone. He completely did not understand why the parchment scroll would suddenly attack him. What was the enormous energy contained within that golden light? Idiot! That's a passage, a spatial crack that connects you to a certain terrifying existence. Just now, it gave me a stern warning. Elam cursed loudly through gritted teeth. As an old fellow who had lived for over 1,000 years, he had never been so close to death as he was today. This was especially true for the half of his brain that had been blown apart. Even now, there were no signs of recovery. One had to know that he was no ordinary mind stealer, but an elder's main brain lich. He was an undead creature through and through. His powerful regenerative abilities were far beyond the imagination of mortals. Even if a legendary warrior were to hack at him with a divine weapon for half an hour, they might not be able to keep up with his regeneration speed. But right now, he could not feel the shattered half of his brain at all. It was as if it had never existed. It was clear that the terrifying energy had completely destroyed the left half of his brain. More accurately, some mysterious force had erased all traces of its existence. Since it no longer existed, it naturally could not be recovered. Passage? Crack? Zhang Cheng subconsciously frowned. He felt a fear that he had never felt before from the ferocious attitude of the other party. Because even the greatest arcanist of the Netheril era was so afraid of the owner behind the parchment, then how could he break free from the other party's control? Here, this is what you want. Quickly get out of my sight. Remember, don't take out that parchment scroll so easily. Otherwise, something terrible might happen. Elam seemed to be afraid of something. He quickly transmitted the memory to his brain through the heart link, and then began to chase Leyland away. As you wish. Zhang Cheng bowed slightly and immediately flapped his wings to return to the air. He flew along the dark tunnel of the Underdark. He had already gotten what he wanted. There was no need to continue wasting time. Even if he stayed, this great arcanist would not tell him what was hidden behind the parchment. However, through the attack just now, he had realized that the owner behind the parchment was far more powerful than the gods who walked the mortal world. A few days later, another small mind stealer city not far from Luskan had been conquered by the dragon Lich Klaus, the half-dead silver dragon Mattis, and an army of undead creatures and constructs. All the mind stealers, whether they were captives or corpses, had their brains dug out and thrown into the huge brain pool. No matter how many times the mastermind tried to cast powerful spells, psionic abilities, or create brain demon golems to resist, they all failed without exception. By the time Zhang Cheng arrived, apart from the corpses of slaves strewn across the ground, the only thing left in this devastated city was a lonely mainframe struggling at death's door. Master, please be careful. The mind has great power, have very powerful. Many people would lose their consciousness and be controlled as soon as they get close. Valindra, who was guarding the perimeter, reminded. Klaus, 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 kill Klaus Kuhn? As soon as he crossed the threshold, he immediately felt an overwhelming spiritual invasion. Obey, obey. I am your supreme master. Submit to me, lowly creature. In less than a minute, he had fallen into a world of illusions. He was surrounded by hundreds of beautiful females of different races, and the table was filled with delicious food and wine. Unfortunately, the mind stealer had underestimated Zhang Cheng's deepest desire. In the blink of an eye, he had broken through the mental illusion created by the psionic ability and returned to reality. Looking at the infuriated mind reaver, Zhang Cheng smirked. He took out a small bottle of concocted medicine and poured it into the mind reaver's brain pool. He then instructed his two subordinates. What are you waiting for? Let's begin. Kuhn, Klaus, Klaus, Kuhn. He cut a hole in his mouth with his claw and let the blood containing divinity flow into it. He then chanted loudly, guiding the primal magical energy that had lost control of the weave. Even though the goddess of magic had fallen for more than 2 months, the weave had not completely collapsed. This was because the first chosen of the goddess of magic, the great sage of the Shadow Valley, Elminster, had risked his life to seal the power of the goddess in his body, preventing the disaster from spreading further. Therefore, in places where the weave was relatively stable, mages, warlocks, and bards could still cast spells normally. Following the awkward chanting, strong energy waves appeared in the surrounding air. Then, the Mind Stealer seemed to have been stimulated and began to madly release Mind Blast. It looked like it was making its last stand. Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 dragons in the room had the characteristics of the undead and were not afraid of any form of mind attack. Zhang Cheng activated his divinity and divine power, temporarily blocking the attacks from reaching his body by 20 centimeters. After about 10 minutes, the Mind Stealer's resistance suddenly stopped. Then, the brain seemed to boil, slowly splitting into small pieces of red and white cells. Sensing that the time was ripe, Zhang Cheng immediately shouted at the silver dragon, "Now!" "Got it." Mad Ace did not hesitate, directly pulling out the broken crystal from Klaus' skull and throwing it into the steaming brain pool. The moment the crystal was thrown in, the separated cells frantically surged towards the crystal, forming a brain-shaped organ in the blink of an eye. Although it was not as big as the Mind Stealer, due to the integration of the broken crystal, it produced a certain amplitude, emitting even more powerful mind waves. Without any hesitation, Zhang Cheng directly used his sharp claws to open his own skull, picked up the shards of magical crystal shimmering with an unusual luster, and fiercely pierced them down. Asterisk poo. Asterisk the crystal pierced through the central nervous system, connecting with the spine. The intense pain made him unable to help but let out a painful roar, the terrifying noise even shattering the surrounding walls and ceiling. At the same time, the cells attached to the broken crystal quickly split, seeping down the gully of the dragon's brain. Not only did they repair the damaged parts, but they also reorganized and optimized the entire brain in less than a few minutes.